Hello, sleepy traveller. Tuck yourself in, dim the room, and prepare for a peaceful drift through uneventful history. If you're enjoying these sleep stories, feel free to give us a like or subscribe, but no pressure at all. Now, let's start our journey. The rooster's crow slices through the pre-dawn mist, echoing across the sprawling fields of cotton that seem to stretch on forever. You blink into the dim light of a small cabin where you, along with several family members, have spent the night on a bed of straw. It's the early 1800s in the American South, and you, like nearly 700,000 others by 1808, are born into slavery. The world outside your door is vast, but your place in it is brutally confined. Life on a plantation is a relentless cycle, driven by the demands of the cotton economy, the fluffy white gold that's fueling both southern wealth and your daily grind. You're about to start a day that looks much like the one before it. As you step into the yard, the air is thick with humidity and the promise of a scorching southern day. The plantation owner, or master as you're forced to call him, has invested heavily in cotton. By 1815, cotton accounts for over half of all U.S. exports, and it's no surprise when you consider that a single bale of cotton, about 500 pounds, could fetch up to 50 in 1800. That's a lot of cash, especially when you consider that the average wage for a free labourer was just a few dollars a week. This is why the master is willing to overlook the moral cost of enslaving human beings, though he might dress it up as a benevolent act in public. You work the fields from sunrise to sunset every day but Sunday. Your labour is unpaid, and your life's worth is calculated based on your ability to pick or plant cotton, not your humanity. The plantation might boast about producing thousands of pounds of cotton each year, but these figures are written in the sweat and blood of those who toil under the hot southern sun. The master might have around 100 slaves working his 1,000-acre plantation, a number that makes him a minor king in the realm of southern agriculture. But here's the kicker. Despite the obvious brutality of the system, the myth of the happy slave is alive and well. It's a narrative concocted by the masters themselves to justify their actions, an absurd tale that claims enslaved people are content, even grateful, for their enslavement. Songs sung in the fields are twisted into proof of happiness, rather than a desperate attempt to alleviate the soul-crushing monotony and despair. The myth even finds its way into literature and propaganda of the time, with characters like Uncle Tom being portrayed as loyal and content. The reality is more sinister and far less romantic. As you carry your sack through the rows of cotton, each step is a reminder of the system's cruelty. Overseers patrol the fields on horseback, wielding whips as both tool and threat. The slightest infraction, a missed quota, a weary response, can result in a vicious beating. Even the children are not spared. They are expected to pick smaller amounts, but pick they must. This is the economic backbone of the South, a system so entrenched that it will take a civil war to dismantle, and even then not completely. You pause for a moment, wiping sweat from your brow, and catch the eye of a fellow labourer. There's a shared understanding, a silent communication that speaks volumes about resilience and resistance. Despite the chains, there are small acts of defiance, tools accidentally broken, tasks completed slowly, songs sung with hidden meanings. It's a subtle, yet powerful assertion of humanity in a world determined to deny it. Midway through the morning, the sun is already high and the air is oppressive. The day drags on, a rhythm punctuated by the dull roar of cicadas and the occasional bark of a dog. Even lunch, a meagre meal of cornbread and pork fat, is wolfed down quickly. There's no time to linger. Every minute is accounted for in the relentless pursuit of profit. The plantation is a well-oiled machine, and you an unwilling cog in its workings. As the afternoon heat cranks up, so does the workload. Meanwhile, the master might be lounging on his porch, perhaps reading a newspaper that lauds the southern economy, built on the backs of the enslaved. He might even entertain guests, extolling the virtues of his family of slaves, conveniently ignoring the fact that families can be torn apart at his whim, sold to other plantations, sometimes hundreds of miles away. You might hear whispers of rebellion, stories of those who have fled northward toward freedom. They're rare, those who escape, but their tales are passed among you like precious secrets. Each story is a flicker of hope, a reminder that while the system is monstrous, it is not unbreakable. The Underground Railroad, a network of secret routes and safe houses, is growing, though perilous and fraught with danger. As the sun begins to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, you return to the cabin, exhausted but alive. It's a small victory in itself. The day might be ending, but for many the struggle continues into the night with tasks of mending clothes or tending to small gardens for extra food. Tomorrow promises to be much the same, the cycle unyielding. This is the reality of plantation life in the early 1800s, wrapped in the economic and social fabric of the time. The myth of the happy slave is a convenient lie, a soothing balm for those who profit from others' suffering. But the truth, stark and unforgiving, is that the system is neither benign nor sustainable. It's a tinderbox waiting for a spark. As night falls, you lie down once more, the weight of another day behind you and the uncertain promise of tomorrow ahead. Rest, if you can. Morning comes early. As you lie down, the reality is unavoidable. Morning will break soon enough, and with it, the unyielding cycle of labor will begin anew. With the first light, the plantation awakens, a beehive of activity fueled by the relentless demands of agriculture. You might think of yourself as just one among many, but each role in this orchestrated chaos is tightly choreographed, leaving little room for deviation. Now, if you were an enslaved person on the plantation, your day would kick off with a routine that's as predictable as it is punishing. You'd grab a quick breakfast, usually cornmeal mush, before heading out to the fields. But not everyone is destined for the cotton rows. Some are assigned specific tasks, perhaps tending to the livestock, maintaining the master's house, or working in the blacksmith shop. Each role is essential to keep the plantation's gears turning smoothly, but make no mistake, there's no good job here, just varying degrees of back-breaking labor. On the flip side, the plantation's hierarchy extends beyond the fields. Enslaved people might be selected as drivers or overseers, a precarious position that offers a sliver of authority, but also places them in the unenviable position of enforcing the master's will. It's a classic divide-and-conquer strategy. The more conflict sown among enslaved people, the less likely they are to unite against their oppressor. Discipline on the plantation is harsh, designed to crush any spark of rebellion before it can ignite. Overseers wield whips not just as tools of correction, but as instruments of terror. The threat of physical punishment looms large, a constant shadow that demands obedience. It's an environment where fear is as abundant as the cotton itself. Each lash a reminder of the brutal realities underpinning this economic powerhouse. Speaking of economies, let's talk about the commodification of human lives, a grim but undeniable facet of this chapter in history. Slave auctions are the starkest display of this dehumanization, where individuals are reduced to little more than livestock. In 1808, the price for a healthy male slave might range from $400 to $500, equivalent to tens of thousands in today's dollars. Women and children, too, are appraised, bought and sold, their value determined by age, health and perceived productivity. These auctions are not just transactions, they're spectacles, attended by those who view them as entertainment or economic opportunity. Imagine the scene, a bustling market square, potential buyers inspecting the merchandise with the detached scrutiny of a livestock auction. It's a cruel theatre where human dignity is stripped away, replaced by cold, hard currency. And yet, the myth of the benevolent master persists, cloaked in the rhetoric of paternalism and economic necessity. Legal frameworks of the time further cement this system, reducing people to property in the eyes of the law. The infamous Dred Scott decision of 1857, for instance, declared that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, could not be American citizens and therefore had no standing to sue in federal court. This legal backdrop isn't just an insult, it's a weapon, wielded to perpetuate an unjust status quo. Slavery isn't just tolerated, it's codified, enshrined in the very laws that claim to uphold liberty and justice. Despite the bleakness, glimmers of defiance and resilience shine through. Enslaved people navigate this brutal world with remarkable ingenuity, finding ways to resist in small but significant ways. Folk tales, songs, and spirituals become vehicles of hope and coded messages, their layers of meaning understood by those in the know. It's a quiet form of rebellion, but potent nonetheless, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. As you reflect on these stories, it's essential to acknowledge their dual nature, both the romance of resistance and the harsh reality of oppression. The legend of the Underground Railroad, for instance, captures the imagination with its tales of daring escapes and hidden networks. Yet the reality is fraught with peril, each journey northward a gamble with freedom as the highest stake. As the morning wears on, the plantation pulses with activity, each person playing their part in a machine that runs on human suffering. The sun climbs higher, casting its relentless heat over the fields as the day stretches ahead, promising more of the same. Yet, amid the monotony and the toil, the seeds of change are sown. Whispers of abolition grow louder, the winds of change stirring in the distance. In this world, where every moment is calculated and every action scrutinized, the endurance of hope becomes an act of rebellion in itself. As you move through the morning, each step is a silent protest, a declaration that while the system may control your labor, it cannot wholly claim your spirit. It's a narrative of survival against the odds, a testament to the resilience of those who refuse to be defined solely by their circumstances. And so, as noon approaches, casting its oppressive heat across the south, the day continues, much like the day before it. But the story of slavery is not static. It is a dynamic, evolving tale of struggle and resistance. The morning may be routine, but history has its surprises, and in the shadows of the status quo, change is always brewing. As the oppressive afternoon heat lays thick like a suffocating blanket, let's shift gears and look at the heart of life under slavery, family and community. You see, for all its cruel machinations, the system couldn't fully erase the human spirit. Enslaved people carved out spaces of resilience and cultural expression, even when every legal and social parameter seemed designed to crush them. Picture this. It's afternoon, and after the back-breaking toil in the fields, you gather with your family in whatever small pocket of time you can steal. This is your lifeline family. It's the glue holding together the fragmented reality of slavery. But the social fabric is constantly under threat. The slaveholder, that benevolent patriarch he likes to imagine himself as, could decide to sell family members on a whim. Imagine that powerlessness, a husband sent to another state, a child sold to a neighboring plantation. It's a real-life horror show. Let's talk numbers. By the 1830s, it's estimated that nearly a third of enslaved children in the Upper South were separated from their families due to the slave trade. Families were torn apart like pages from a book, their stories unfinished and fragmented. The myth of the kind master often glossed over this harsh reality, painting an image of a paternal figure who cared for his slaves. But let's be real. It's hard to see kindness in someone who treats humans like cattle, though they sure tried to spin it that way. Despite these horrors, enslaved people found ways to maintain family bonds and cultural identity. They created their own rituals, passed down stories, and sang songs that held layers of meaning, both spiritual and rebellious. These were not just tunes to pass the time. They were the threads of a cultural tapestry being woven in defiance of an oppressive system. Community gatherings, often held in secret, became critical for sharing news and maintaining a sense of identity. These were the original underground networks, a place where whispers of rebellion and tales of escape could be passed on. It's a bit like an 1800s version of a social media network where the currency wasn't likes or shares, but hope and solidarity. The legal framework of the time, of course, was no friend to the enslaved family. Laws essentially designated slaves as property, which meant they had no rights to family life. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 only exacerbated the situation, allowing slaveholders to pursue escaped slaves into free states, further endangering families. It's as if the law itself had a vendetta against unity and love. Yet, in the face of such adversity, enslaved people demonstrated astonishing resilience. Marriages were formed and honored, even if they weren't legally recognized. Couples would jump the broom, a ceremony full of symbolism and cultural significance. It was a declaration that, despite the system's attempts to dehumanize, love and commitment could still blossom. Even the plantation's grim hierarchy had its own warped sense of community. Those in positions such as drivers or house slaves often served as intermediaries, providing a channel for information and sometimes even a source of protection for their fellow enslaved people. It's a complicated dynamic, but one that speaks to the nuanced ways people navigated this oppressive landscape. And let's not forget the ingenious coded language embedded in songs and stories. These weren't mere expressions of culture, they were tools of survival. Spirituals like Steal Away and Follow the Drinking Gourd were not just for Sunday choirs. They were roadmaps to freedom, full of hidden messages for those daring enough to seek a new life beyond the shackles. There's a certain romance in the idea of an underground resistance, and it's true that these cultural expressions fed the spirit of rebellion. Yet the harsh reality was that for every story of triumph, there were countless tales of heartbreak. The journey north on the Underground Railroad was perilous, fraught with the risk of capture and brutal punishment. As the afternoon stretches on, you might find yourself involved in communal tasks, like tending to a small vegetable garden. These plots, meagre though they were, provided a semblance of independence, and were crucial for supplementing the meagre rations provided by the slaveholder. Here, too, the community spirit shone through, with seeds and harvests shared among families, a silent testament to solidarity. In the evenings, after the day's labour and the evening tasks, families would gather to share stories, legends passed down from African roots, tales of Anansi the spider and Brer Rabbit characters who outsmarted their foes with wit and cunning. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were life lessons in resilience, a coded encouragement to outwit the system whenever possible. Despite their circumstances, enslaved people formed rich, interconnected communities that defied the very system designed to dehumanize them. It's a stark reminder that even in the bleakest conditions, the human capacity for love, connection, and defiance cannot be wholly extinguished. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the fields, the day's labor finally ends. But the work of maintaining family and community continues, a testament to the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to be defined solely by their bondage. In these small acts of defiance, the seeds of future change were sown, nurturing a legacy of resistance and resilience that would eventually help to topple the institution of slavery itself. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. The journey through history continues, with more tales of survival, defiance, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. Each step forward is a reminder that while history is filled with struggle, it is also rich with the triumphs of the human spirit. As twilight descends and the day's labour finally comes to an end, you find yourself with a rare moment to breathe and reflect. The air cools slightly, offering a brief reprieve from the oppressive heat, and you gather with others by the flickering light of a small fire. Here, in this shared space, survival isn't just about enduring another day, it's about finding ways to resist, even in the smallest of gestures. Let's dive into the world of resistance. We're not just talking about grand, sweeping acts of rebellion, but the everyday acts of defiance that chipped away at the institution of slavery. You might have heard the myth that enslaved people passively accepted their fate, but that's as believable as a politician's promise. In reality, resistance was everywhere, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, but always present. Consider the likes of Nat Turner, whose name sends shivers down the spines of plantation owners across the South. In August 1831, Turner led a rebellion in Southampton County, Virginia. With a small band of followers, he struck fear into the hearts of slaveholders by leading a violent uprising that resulted in the deaths of approximately 60 white people. The rebellion was short-lived, and Turner was captured and executed, but his actions left a lasting impact. It forced a nation to confront the reality that slavery was not a benign institution, but a powder keg waiting to explode. Now, Nat Turner's rebellion wasn't an isolated incident. In fact, organized rebellions were more common than you might think. Denmark Vesey, a free black man in Charleston, South Carolina, planned a massive slave revolt in 1822. He was inspired by the successful Haitian Revolution, the only slave uprising that led to the founding of a state free from slavery and ruled by non-whites and former captives. Vesey's plot was betrayed before it could be realized, and he, along with 34 others, was executed. Yet his legacy lived on, a testament to the enduring spirit of resistance. But not all defiance was so overt. In the daily grind of plantation life, enslaved people found subtle ways to resist. Ever hear of putting one over on the boss? Well, this is where it started. Tools would mysteriously break, or work would slow to a crawl. These acts of sabotage were small, but they were powerful symbols of defiance against a system that sought to dehumanize. Songs and stories played their part too. Spirituals, like Wade in the Water, weren't just catchy tunes, they were coded messages, offering guidance on how to evade capture when escaping. It's like an early version of a secret chat app, but with more soul and less Wi-Fi. And let's not forget the oral traditions that kept alive, the tales of Africa, subtly reinforcing cultural identity in a world that sought to erase it. Then there were those who took the ultimate risk, running away. The Underground Railroad wasn't a literal railroad, but a network of safe houses and secret routes that helped enslaved people escape to the north and, in some cases, all the way to Canada. Conductors like Harriet Tubman, who made 13 missions to rescue approximately 70 enslaved people, became legends in their own time. Her nickname? Moses. And rightfully so, because leading her people to freedom was no small feat. For those who stayed behind, community gatherings served as crucial support systems. These were spaces where news of the outside world could be shared and plans for future acts of resistance could be hatched. It's like a secret society with a common goal: undermine the system and survive. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of the contented slave. This was a fairy tale spun by those who needed to justify their own actions. In reality, the vast majority of enslaved people were anything but content. They were human beings, yearning for freedom and willing to fight tooth and nail to achieve it. Even the legal system of the time reflects this tension. After Turner's Rebellion, southern states enacted even harsher laws, restricting the movement and assembly of enslaved people. It was a classic case of trying to close the barn door after the horse had bolted. The oppressive laws only fueled further resistance, proving that repression often breeds rebellion. In this evening of reflection, it's clear that the story of slavery isn't one of passive acceptance. It's a story of defiance, resilience, and the unbreakable human spirit. Each act of resistance, no matter how small, was a step toward freedom, and each step, though fraught with danger, brought hope that one day the chains would be broken for good. As the fire flickers and the stars begin to dot the night sky, you realize that this struggle is far from over. The stories of Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, and Harriet Tubman are not just tales of the past. They are reminders of the power of collective action and the enduring fight for justice. History might be written by the victors, but the voices of those who resisted echo through time, reminding us of the complexities and courage of those who refused to be silenced. So, as you sit by the fire, let these stories of resistance and survival inspire a deeper understanding of this tumultuous chapter in history. The journey is far from complete, and the lessons learned are as relevant today as ever. Stay tuned, because the night is long, but it's always darkest before the dawn. And so, as the night wraps you in its cool embrace, let's pivot to the broader implications of this sordid chapter in history. Slavery wasn't just a southern problem, it was America's Achilles heel, a festering sore that demanded the ultimate bloodletting, the Civil War, to even begin healing. By 1860, over 4 million people were enslaved in the United States, accounting for nearly 13% of the population. This human tragedy was woven into the very economic fabric of the nation, making emancipation as complex as it was necessary. The road to emancipation wasn't paved with good intentions alone. Nope, it was cobbled together with political maneuvering, economic pressures, and, yes, the stark reality of warfare. Let's talk Abraham Lincoln, a name that practically screams emancipation. But here's the kicker. Lincoln's initial goal wasn't to abolish slavery, but to preserve the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 was as much a strategic move as it was a moral one. By freeing slaves in Confederate territories, Lincoln aimed to weaken the South's economic base and bolster the Union war effort. It's like a masterstroke in a high-stakes chess game, one that ultimately changed the course of American history. And let's not sugarcoat the Civil War. It was brutal, bloody, and devastating, claiming around 600,000 lives, more Americans than in both world wars combined. The myth of the honorable Southern gentleman fighting for states' rights conveniently glosses over the central issue, slavery. Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens made it crystal clear in his infamous Cornerstone speech, stating that the Confederacy's foundation lay in the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man. Romanticize that if you want, but the truth is as cold as the marble statues that honor these so-called heroes. The war ended in 1865. with General Robert E. Lee surrendering to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. It was a moment that heralded the end of the Confederacy and the beginning of Reconstruction. A turbulent era that was as messy as the ink spilled in its legislative battles. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, abolished slavery, but freedom was just the first step in a marathon toward equality. The 14th and 15th Amendments followed, granting citizenship and voting rights to African American men. Yet, these legal victories were often undermined by local laws and practices designed to maintain white supremacy. Reconstruction. A word that should conjure images of progress, but often evokes a period of dashed hopes. Federal troops occupied the South to enforce new laws, but their presence was met with fierce resistance. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan emerged, their cowardly hoods barely concealing their intent to terrorize and oppress. By 1877, the federal government had largely washed its hands of the South, pulling troops and effectively leaving African Americans to fend for themselves in a hostile environment. It's like throwing someone a life preserver, only to yank it away just as they reach for it. Yet, amid the chaos, African Americans made significant strides. By the early 1870s, more than 600 African Americans had been elected to state legislatures, and 16 served in Congress. These were trailblazers, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in a society still grappling with its own prejudices. But the backlash was swift and severe. Jim Crow laws institutionalized racial segregation, and the Supreme Court's decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896, enshrined the separate but equal doctrine, effectively locking African Americans into a second-class citizenship. Fast forward, and you see the echoes of this tumultuous era in modern America. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s was a direct response to the failures of Reconstruction. Icons like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X emerged, their voices carrying the hopes and dreams of a marginalized people. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were monumental achievements, but the struggle for equality was far from over. It's a battle that's still being fought today, in courtrooms, on streets, and in the hearts and minds of a nation still coming to terms with its past. You can see the legacy of slavery in the economic disparities that persist, with black households holding a fraction of the wealth of their white counterparts. The criminal justice system, too, bears the scars of a history steeped in racial bias. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world, with African Americans disproportionately represented, a modern-day reflection of the systemic inequities rooted in slavery. The myth of the benevolent slaveholder and the contented slave persists in some corners of American consciousness, often fueled by nostalgic portrayals in media. Think Gone with the Wind, or those romanticized plantations turned wedding venues. But make no mistake, these are sanitized versions of history, stripped of the brutality and injustice that defined the lived experiences of millions. As we wrap up this journey through history, it's important to remember that the story of slavery is not just a tale of oppression, but also of resilience, resistance, and, ultimately, redemption. It's a testament to the indomitable human spirit, the ability to fight for justice even when the odds seem insurmountable. And it's a reminder that while the past can inform the present, it's up to us to shape a future where equality isn't just an ideal, but a reality. So, as you drift off to sleep, let these stories of struggle and triumph linger in your mind. History is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of hope and despair, progress and setbacks. It's a living, breathing narrative, and by understanding its complexities, we can better navigate the challenges of today. After all, the night may be long, but it's always darkest before the dawn. In the grand theatre of ancient history, Carthage played the role of the savvy businessman who sidles up to you at a cocktail party and somehow manages to sell you insurance in a new yacht. Nestled on the North African coast, Carthage was the kind of place that could give Venice a run for its money in terms of prime real estate and strategic positioning. Founded by the Phoenicians around 812 BCE, those master navigators hailing from what is today Lebanon, Carthage was like the promising startup that quickly turned into a multinational corporation, thanks to its enviable spot smack in the middle of the Mediterranean trade routes. Picture a bustling port where ships from all corners of the known world docked. Carthage wasn't just a city, it was a veritable maritime empire in the making. Now, when we talk about Carthaginian naval power, we're really talking about a well-oiled machine that was as much about raw economic clout as it was about warships bristling with bronze. Carthage had a knack for turning trade into an art form. They weren't your average merchants hawking spices and textiles. These guys were dealing in silver, ivory, and even those coveted Tyrian purple dyes that made Roman senators look like they'd just stepped off a fashion runway. By the time Carthage had hit its stride, it controlled more than 300 cities, stretching from Spain to Sicily. Think of it as the Mediterranean's answer to a sprawling empire of Amazon fulfillment centers. But let's get back to the ships, shall we? Carthage's fleets weren't just floating stacks of cash, they were cutting-edge technology on the high seas. In their heyday, Carthage boasted a navy of around 30-50 warships, a number that would make even the most ambitious naval commanders of the day green with envy. Their secret sauce was the quinquereme, a fearsome vessel that was the ancient equivalent of an aircraft carrier. Big, intimidating, and packed with more firepower than the average ancient city could handle. The quinquereme wasn't just another pretty hull bobbing on the water. This beast was a 5-banked rowing warship, equipped with a battering ram and capable of holding hundreds of warriors ready to storm enemy decks. Carthaginians were such pioneers in naval design that their ships could be considered the Teslas of the ancient world, except these ones didn't require a charging station, just a lot of burly rowers who probably had biceps the size of watermelons. So how did a Phoenician colony turn into such a maritime juggernaut? The answer lies in a mix of shrewd diplomacy, strategic marriage alliances, and, let's face it, a bit of good old-fashioned piratical ambition. The Carthaginians were nothing if not practical, and they knew that controlling the sea lanes meant controlling trade, which in turn meant controlling wealth. They didn't just build ships, they built an entire seafaring culture, ensuring their sailors were among the most skilled in the Mediterranean. Carthage's deep ties to the sea were cemented by their religious practices too. Their chief god, Baal-Hamon, often depicted with a crown of rays, was a deity associated with weather and therefore, by extension, with the sea. It's as if the Carthaginians had their own divine patron ensuring smooth sailing, a maritime godfather, if you will. Of course, any good story has its villains, and Carthage's tale is no exception. Enter Rome, stage left, with its legions of disciplined soldiers and a thirst for expansion. The Romans were the neighbours who moved in next door and immediately started parking their chariots on your lawn. They viewed Carthage as both a threat and an opportunity, a challenge to their dominance that needed to be dealt with, but also a treasure trove of riches just waiting to be seized. Carthage's maritime prowess would eventually lead to the Punic Wars, a series of 3 brutal conflicts that saw the two powers slug it out, both on land and at sea. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's just appreciate the fact that Carthage, through a potent mix of innovation, strategic savvy, and a touch of ruthless ambition, managed to carve out a naval empire that was the envy of the ancient world. They were the Elon Musk of the Mediterranean, pushing boundaries and reshaping the world one wave at a time. And speaking of reshaping the world, let's dive deeper into what made Carthage the Henry Ford of ancient shipbuilding. If you think assembly lines are a modern marvel, think again. The Carthaginians were rolling out ships with a speed and efficiency that would make any industrialist swoon. Their shipyards were like ancient factories, cranking out quinqueremes faster than you can say Phoenician craftsmanship. This was no small feat when you consider the average quinquereme was about 45 meters long and required around 300 rowers to operate. Talk about a logistical nightmare. Now, let's talk numbers because, after all, money talks and ships sail. Building one of these bad boys didn't come cheap. The cost of a single quinquereme could run as high as 200,000 drachmas, which, in today's terms, would be equivalent to several $1 million. That's the kind of price tag that would make even the wealthiest Carthaginian merchant arch an eyebrow. The Carthaginians had to be savvy with their resources, using locally sourced wood from North Africa and importing high-quality timber like cedar from Lebanon. They were like the IKEA of the ancient world, assembling ships with precision and an eye for design. But it wasn't just about the ships, it was about the empire they supported. Carthage's fleets were the lifeblood of its economy. securing trade routes and protecting its merchant vessels from piracy, which, let's face it, was the ancient equivalent of highway robbery. You can bet your last sestetius that the Carthaginians took piracy very seriously. They weren't about to let a bunch of seafaring bandits mess with their bottom line. This is where their naval prowess came into play, ensuring that their ships sailed the Mediterranean unmolested, a mobile fortress on water. Carthage's shipbuilding prowess was also a family affair. The Maganid dynasty, which ruled Carthage for over a century, was instrumental in developing this maritime powerhouse. They set up a kind of naval academy where future admirals could learn the ropes, quite literally. With a focus on innovation and tactical superiority, the Maganids turned Carthage into a naval juggernaut. Their approach was as much about brains as it was about brawn, training sailors in the fine art of navigation and sea warfare. But let's not romanticize it too much. While their ships were engineering marvels, life aboard them was anything but glamorous. Imagine being packed like sardines on a wooden leviathan, rowing for hours under the blistering sun or in the teeth of a storm. The rowers, often slaves or lower-class citizens, were the unsung heroes of Carthage's maritime empire. They were the engine that powered these great vessels, and their lives were a far cry from the adventurous voyages of legend. Yet, the Carthaginians understood that to control the sea was to control destiny. Their ships were more than just war machines. They were the arteries through which the city's lifeblood flowed. Every timber laid, every sail hoisted, was a testament to Carthage's ambition and its relentless drive for dominance. Their ships carried not just goods, but the very soul of an empire, projecting Carthaginian power across the Mediterranean like a shadow. And then there's the quinquereme itself, a masterpiece of naval architecture. It was the Formula One car of its day, designed for speed, agility, and power. With 5 banks of oars, it could reach speeds of up to 9 knots, making it the fastest thing on water. Ancient jet ski? Anyone? Its bronze-tipped battering ram was the stuff of nightmares for any enemy vessel foolish enough to get in its way. This wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon of mass destruction, capable of turning the tide of battle with a single devastating charge. While the Romans were still figuring out which end of a ship was which, the Carthaginians were already perfecting their fleet, experimenting with new designs and tactics. This wasn't just about keeping up with the Joneses. This was about ensuring that Carthage's place at the top of the maritime pecking order was never in doubt. They were playing chess, while everyone else was still learning checkers. So, what's the takeaway here? Carthage wasn't just a player on the Mediterranean stage, it was the star of the show, with its fleets as the leading act. The Carthaginians understood something that still rings true today: control the seas, and you control the narrative. Their ships were the embodiment of their ambition, a testament to a civilization that dared to dream big and sail even bigger. As we sail away from this chapter of Carthaginian maritime mastery, it's clear that their legacy isn't just in the ships they built, but in the empire they forged. The sea was their domain, and they ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. But hold on to your triremes, the story's far from over. There's still plenty of uncharted waters ahead as we delve deeper into the saga of Carthage and its clash with Rome for Mediterranean supremacy. Stay tuned, because the waves are about to get choppier. And so, as we cast off into the next chapter of Carthaginian naval lore, let's turn our gaze to the real muscle behind their maritime might, the people who rowed the boats, fought the battles, and, quite literally, kept the empire afloat. You see, the romance of naval warfare often glosses over the gritty reality of life at sea. It's easy to imagine the Carthaginian navy as an unstoppable force, but just ask any sailor who spent a night on the quinquereme. Invincibility is a myth best left to the storytellers. First, let's talk about the rowers. These weren't volunteers signing up for a Mediterranean cruise. The truth is, the majority were slaves or lower-class citizens conscripted into service. Imagine being packed into a hole, shoulder to shoulder with 100 others, rowing for hours on end. It was back-breaking work with all the romance of a grueling spin class, minus the motivational playlists. With each pull of the oar, they powered a vessel that could weigh up to 100 tons, and for this privilege they earned little more than the occasional stale loaf of bread and a place to sleep below decks. Now, if you're thinking, how did they keep morale up? The answer is simple: they didn't. The Carthaginian navy wasn't exactly a model of employee satisfaction. the harsh conditions, and relentless labour bred resentment and rebellion, which were as much a threat to the fleet as any Roman trireme. It's a testament to human endurance that these men could keep going at all. But necessity is the mother of invention, and Carthage needed its rowers to be as relentless as the tides. The soldiers aboard these ships were no less hardy. While the rowers powered the vessel, these warriors turned it into a floating fortress. Armed with spears, swords, and slings, they were the ancient equivalent of marines, ready to storm enemy ships or repel boarders at a moment's notice. But let's not kid ourselves, the life of a Carthaginian soldier wasn't all glory and plunder. Combat was brutal and chaotic, and the sea was an unforgiving arena. Think about it, one wrong step on a wet deck, and you'd find yourself in a watery grave, armour and all. And then there were the captains, the men who had to make sense of the chaos. Steering a quinquereme through a naval battle was like playing chess on a board that's constantly shifting beneath your feet. The Carthaginians were famed for their tactical acumen, but even the best-laid plans could go awry. Fog, stormy seas, or simply the unpredictable nature of battle could throw strategy overboard. In such moments, the myth of invincibility was laid bare, and it became clear that even Carthage's mighty navy was not immune to the whims of fate. But let's not forget the economic backdrop that shaped this naval juggernaut. Carthage wasn't just fighting for glory, it was fighting for economic survival. Control of the sea lanes meant control of trade, and trade was the lifeblood of the Carthaginian economy. Every ship that returned to port laden with goods was a testament to Carthage's economic might. This is where the navy truly shone, enforcing Carthaginian interests and ensuring that their merchant vessels could sail the Mediterranean unmolested. So, why the myth of invincibility? Simple, it was good for business. A reputation for naval dominance could deter would-be pirates and rivals, maintaining Carthaginian supremacy without the need for constant conflict. But beneath this polished veneer lay a complex reality. For every triumphant battle, there were countless skirmishes and setbacks. And for every legend of Carthaginian invincibility, there was a tale of hubris, reminding us that even the mightiest fleets could falter. And there's something to be said about the brass tacks of naval warfare. The Carthaginian fleet was a well-oiled machine, but it was also a logistical nightmare. Each quinquereme required around 300 rowers, 120 soldiers, and a handful of officers to operate. That's a lot of mouths to feed and a lot of moving parts to manage. Every voyage required meticulous planning, from rationing supplies to navigating treacherous waters. It was a testament to Carthaginian ingenuity that they could keep the whole operation afloat, quite literally. In the end, the Carthaginian navy was as much a product of its time as it was a harbinger of things to come. It was a force to be reckoned with, but it was also a reflection of the complexity and contradictions inherent in any great endeavour. The people who powered this fleet, slaves, soldiers, captains, were the unsung heroes of Carthage's maritime empire. They endured hardship and danger, driven by forces beyond their control, yet they played a pivotal role in shaping the course of history. So, as we sail toward the next chapter of Carthaginian naval history, let's keep in mind the human element that fueled their ambitions. The myth of invincibility may be a comforting story, but the reality is far more nuanced. The Carthaginian navy was a formidable force, but it was also a reflection of the society that built it, a society of contradictions and complexities, of ambition and adversity. And as we delve deeper into the saga of Carthage, we'll see how these elements continued to shape the fate of the ancient world. Hold on tight, because the waves are only getting rougher. As we sail toward the next chapter of Carthaginian naval history, we find ourselves on the cusp of one of the ancient world's most audacious maritime showdowns, the Battle of Cape Ecnomus. Picture this scene as a blockbuster sequel with more drama, higher stakes, and, unfortunately for the Carthaginians, a plot twist no one saw coming. Now, the Battle of Cape Ecnomus wasn't just any old naval skirmish, it was the naval equivalent of a heavyweight boxing match, with the Carthaginians and Romans squaring off for the title of Mediterranean champion. The year was 256 BCE, and the First Punic War was in full swing. On one side, you had Carthage, the seasoned maritime heavyweight, boasting a sophisticated fleet and generations of seafaring expertise. On the other, Rome, a landlubber turned sailor, eager to prove that it could do more than just parade around in togas and sandals. Let's set the stage with some numbers to whet your historical appetite. The Romans, led by consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso Longus, mustered an impressive fleet of around 30 ships, each brimming with Roman soldiers itching for a fight. The Carthaginians, not to be outdone, countered with a fleet of 350 ships, manned by sailors who practically had seawater in their veins. Now, let's talk strategy, because that's where the real intrigue of Cape Ecnomus unfolds. The Romans, realizing their lack of naval experience, decided to play to their strengths, land combat. They transformed their ships into floating battlefields by outfitting them with a nifty contraption called the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned naval engagements into the kind of close-quarters brawl Romans excelled at. This was less about elegant naval maneuvers and more about bringing the fight up close and personal. The Carthaginians, on the other hand, were banking on their superior seamanship and ship maneuverability to outflank and outwit the Romans. But here's where the myth of Carthaginian naval invincibility starts to show its cracks. The Carthaginian strategy relied heavily on breaking the Roman formation and picking off ships like a pack of wolves circling their prey. Unfortunately for them, the Romans had come with a plan as solid as their famed legions. In a move straight out of a naval tactics playbook, the Romans arrayed their ships in a wedge formation, a cunning strategy designed to concentrate their forces and maximize the impact of their corvus. Imagine a giant arrowhead slicing through the waves, with the Roman flagship at its tip, daring the Carthaginians to break it. As the fleets clashed off the coast of Sicily, the air was thick with the scent of salt and the din of battle. The Carthaginians, fueled by confidence and perhaps a tad of overestimation, charged the Roman lines, hoping to break their formation. But the Romans, with their corvus bridges deployed, turned the sea into a boarding frenzy. It was a naval slugfest, and the Romans were in their element. Despite their numerical advantage and maritime lineage, the Carthaginians found themselves outmaneuvered and outmatched. In a twist of irony, their famed naval tactics, honed over generations, fell victim to the brute force and ingenuity of their Roman adversaries. The Romans captured or sank a staggering 94 Carthaginian ships, while losing only 24 of their own, a significant blow to Carthaginian pride and power. But beyond the numbers and tactical blunders, the Battle of Cape Ecnomus was a wake-up call for the Carthaginians. It debunked the myth of their naval superiority and exposed the vulnerability lurking beneath their reputation. The defeat was a stark reminder that even the most seasoned sailors could be outwitted by a land-based power willing to innovate and adapt. Yet, in the grand theatre of ancient conflict, Cape Ecnomus was merely an opening act. The Romans, buoyed by their victory, pressed on with their ambitions, while the Carthaginians regrouped, determined to reclaim their maritime dominance. The battle may have been lost, but the war was far from over. In the aftermath of Ecnomus, the Carthaginians were forced to rethink their strategies and adapt to a new reality where Roman ingenuity posed a genuine threat. This was no longer just a battle for control of the seas, it was a battle for the very identity of Carthaginian naval power. As we turn the page on this chapter of maritime history, it's clear that the Battle of Cape Ecnomus was a turning point, a moment when the tides of fortune shifted and the myth of invincibility was replaced by the harsh realities of warfare. But the Carthaginian story doesn't end here. The waves of history continued to churn, and the Carthaginians, ever resilient, would find new ways to challenge Rome's growing supremacy. So stay tuned, because the Mediterranean stage is set for more epic clashes, daring strategies, and the relentless pursuit of power. The Carthaginians might have taken a hit, but their saga is far from over. The seas are vast, the stakes are high, and the next act in this ancient drama promises to be as riveting as the last. And with the Carthaginians licking their wounds, the Mediterranean drama continued to unfold, like a particularly gripping season finale that left audiences clamoring for more. But alas, the next episode didn't exactly spell a turnaround for Carthage. As Rome flexed its naval muscles, the Carthaginians found themselves in a precarious position. Their once mighty fleets, symbols of invincibility, were now facing the grim spectre of decline. So, what went wrong, and how did Carthage go from top dog to footnote in the annals of naval history? First, let's talk money, Because if there's one thing that can sink a maritime empire faster than a Roman boarding bridge, it's an empty treasury. Carthage's economy was like a high-stakes poker game where the buy-in kept increasing, but the house always seemed to win. The prolonged conflict with Rome drained Carthage's coffers, leaving the city scrambling to fund its once glorious navy. Ships cost money, and as we've established, these weren't your average rowboats. A quinquereme didn't just build itself, and every drachma spent on maintenance and manpower was a drachma not spent on expansion or innovation. Carthage's economic woes were compounded by a series of political missteps that would make even the most seasoned politician cringe. The Carthaginians had a knack for shooting themselves in the foot, metaphorically speaking. Take the decision to raise taxes to fund the war effort. It seemed like a sensible move, but it backfired spectacularly, breeding discontent among the populace and sowing the seeds of unrest. Carthage's ruling elite, ensconced in their ivory towers, seemed oblivious to the brewing storm. A classic case of fiddling, while Rome, quite literally, burned. And then there was the issue of leadership, or rather, the lack thereof. Carthage's political system, a complex blend of oligarchy and democracy, was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Decision-making was sluggish, and the constant infighting among the city's elite meant that strategy was often dictated by personal vendettas rather than sound military tactics. It was a recipe for disaster, and the Carthaginians were serving it up in spades. As the Punic Wars dragged on, Carthage's naval prowess began to wane. The city that had once ruled the waves now found itself struggling to keep its head above water. The Romans, ever resourceful, capitalized on Carthage's weaknesses, using their newfound naval strength to cut off Carthaginian supply lines and choke the city's economy. The writing was on the wall, and it was clear that Carthage's days as a maritime power were numbered. But let's not just pin the blame on economics and politics. The decline of Carthaginian naval dominance was also a matter of changing times. The world was evolving, and Carthage, with its reliance on tradition and maritime supremacy, was ill-equipped to adapt. Rome, on the other hand, was a rising power, unafraid to embrace innovation and challenge the status quo. The Romans were like that scrappy start-up that came out of nowhere and disrupted the entire industry, leaving the old guard scrambling to catch up. In the end, the fall of Carthage wasn't just a story of naval defeat, it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of complacency and the perils of resting on one's laurels. The Carthaginians had built an empire on the back of their navy, but they failed to see the cracks in the foundation until it was too late. It's a lesson as old as time: adapt or perish. Now, before we wrap up this historical roller coaster, let's take a moment to reflect on the myth versus the reality. Carthage, with its glittering ships and storied past, has often been romanticized as a lost civilization of unparalleled grandeur. There's a certain allure to the idea of a city that ruled the seas and challenged Rome for supremacy. But the reality, as we've seen, was far more complex. Carthage was a city of contradictions, a place where ambition and innovation coexisted with hubris and short-sightedness. So, what can modern powers learn from the rise and fall of Carthage? For starters, never underestimate the importance of adaptability. The world is in a constant state of flux, and those who cling to the past are often left behind. Carthage's failure to innovate and embrace change was its undoing, a lesson that resonates in today's fast-paced, ever-changing global landscape. Secondly, it's a stark reminder of the role that economic stability plays in sustaining power. No amount of military might can compensate for an empty treasury, and Carthage's financial woes were a key factor in its decline. In an era where fiscal policy can make or break nations, the importance of sound economic management cannot be overstated. And finally, leadership matters, perhaps more than anything else. Carthage's political missteps and lack of decisive leadership were its Achilles heel, proving that even the most formidable forces can falter when guided by discord and indecision. As we bid farewell to the Carthaginian navy, let's remember both the legend and the reality, the triumphs and the tribulations. Carthage's story is one of ambition and innovation, but it's also a tale of hubris and downfall. It's a narrative that continues to captivate and caution, reminding us that history, much like the sea, is vast, unpredictable, and full of lessons waiting to be learned. And so, dear listener, as you drift off into the arms of Morpheus, Let the waves of history wash over you, taking you back to a time when Carthage ruled the seas. The story may be ancient, but its echoes are timeless, a testament to the enduring power of history to illuminate the present and guide the future. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the adventures of quinquiremes and the tales of those who dared to challenge an empire. In the crisp morning air of 13th century Toledo, you find yourself at the heart of a city bustling with more curiosity and chaos than a medieval market day. Toledo wasn't just any old city, mind you. It was the intellectual rock concert of its age, headlined by Christians, Muslims and Jews, all jamming together in a symphony of ideas that would make your modern multiculturalist heart sing. Here, cobblestones echoed with the chatter of 1,000 tongues, and the scent of spice mixed with the musty aroma of ancient tomes. It's the kind of place where you could grab a falafel and a philosophy lesson in one afternoon stroll. Toledo was the buzzing epicenter of knowledge transfer, a medieval Silicon Valley, if you will, only with fewer hoodies and more robes. The fact that 3 major religious groups could coexist here might seem like a utopian fairy tale, but it was as real as the dust beneath your feet. Sure, they weren't always holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but necessity often trumps animosity when there's money and prestige on the line. The city thrived as a hub for translating the ancient wisdom of the Greeks and Arabs into Latin, making it accessible to European scholars. It was like Google Translate, but with more parchment and fewer typos. As you wander through the narrow streets, you get a sense of the economic machine that kept the city humming. Picture bustling markets where traders hawked everything from silk to spices, and where every coin spent was a vote in the grand economic experiment of supply and demand. And let's talk about the coins themselves. Silver dinars, gold bezants, and copper maravedis jingled in the pockets of merchants and conmen alike. A silver dinar could get you a decent meal and a jug of wine, but you'd need a gold bezant if you were eyeing a shiny new cloak or a particularly fine piece of Andalusian pottery. Now, if you're wondering how much it cost to live in this vibrant metropolis, let's break it down. Rent for a modest dwelling might run you a few maravedis a month, while a skilled craftsman might earn a handful of dinars for a week's labor. It wasn't a life of luxury for most, but it was a living enough to keep the bread on the table and the oil in the lamp. The real estate market was as competitive as the medieval jousting tournaments, with prime spots near the cathedral or the marketplace fetching a pretty penny. Among all this economic hustle and bustle, alchemists were the rock stars of the intellectual scene. Picture them hunched over their workbenches, surrounded by the smell of sulphur and the sound of bubbling concoctions. These folks were the ultimate dreamers, trying to turn base metals into gold, quite literally. They were like the start-up founders of their time, only instead of pitching apps, they were mixing mysterious potions and scribbling incomprehensible equations. And while they never quite cracked the code to eternal wealth or life, spoiler alert, lead is still lead. They did lay the groundwork for modern chemistry. But let's not get too romantic about the whole alchemist thing. Sure, they wore cool robes and had mysterious manuscripts, but they were also just trying to make a living like everyone else. And in a city like Toledo, with its constant influx of ideas and goods, they had access to materials and texts that most of Europe could only dream of. The trade routes snaking through the city were like the veins of a living organism, pulsing with the lifeblood of commerce and culture. Through these routes flowed not just spices and silks, but also knowledge. Arabic texts, Greek philosophies, and Jewish wisdom, all converging in Toledo's melting pot. You see, the real magic of Toledo wasn't in the alchemists' flasks, but in the city's ability to nurture innovation through diversity. It was a place where the daily grind of economic survival was inextricably linked with the pursuit of intellectual enlightenment. And while the city was a beacon of learning, it wasn't without its shadows. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, and the occasional flare-up of conflict reminded everyone that coexistence required constant negotiation and compromise. As the day progresses and the sun climbs higher, you can't help but be swept up in the energy of the place. It's a city where the past, present, and future seem to coexist in a delicate dance, where the ancient and the avant-garde intertwine in a tapestry of human endeavor. And as you stroll through the streets, you realize that Toledo's story isn't just about the alchemists or the traders or the scholars. It's about all of them, and how their lives intersected in the most vibrant city of its time. And so, our stroll through Toledo takes a detour into the shadowy world of the alchemists. These folks, with their penchant for turning lead into gold, were the medieval equivalent of Silicon Valley coders trying to hack the universe. Let's be real, though. We're talking about people who genuinely thought they could cook up immortality in a cauldron. In today's terms, it's like buying into a startup promising to solve world hunger with a single app: ambitious, wildly hopeful, and slightly delusional. Now, if you think these alchemists were just hooded mystics mumbling incantations, think again. Sure, they had a flair for the dramatic, but beneath the esoteric mumbo-jumbo was the early stirrings of modern chemistry. Their workbenches looked like a chaotic artist's palette. Jars of sulphur, mercury, and saltpeter were their paints, fire their brush, and the philosopher's stone, their elusive masterpiece. Ah yes, the philosopher's stone, the holy grail of the alchemical world. It was said to not only turn base metals into gold, but also grant eternal life. Spoiler alert, nobody ever found it. But the myth was so alluring, it kept them tinkering for centuries. Let's talk tools of the trade. Imagine glass alembics, crucibles made of clay, and bellows to stoke the fires. A medieval chemistry set, minus the safety goggles. These were the instruments of transformation, the means to unlock nature's secrets. Alchemists would spend hours, days, even months, hunched over these tools, their faces bathed in the eerie glow of burning phosphorus, hoping to glimpse the divine in a metal's transmutation. It sounds poetic, but in reality it was a lot of trial and error, mostly error. And error had a price. Alchemy wasn't just about mystical musings, it was about materials. Mercury, lead, sulphur. These weren't just ingredients, they were investments. A pound of mercury might cost you a few dinars, a not-so-small fortune if your latest experiment went up in smoke. The economic reality was brutal. Alchemists had to justify their expenses, often relying on wealthy patrons who, driven by greed or curiosity, funded these quests with the hope of striking gold. Think of it as venture capitalism with a bit more existential risk and a lot more fire hazards. Yet, despite the odds, some alchemists genuinely contributed to the scientific knowledge of the day. Take, for instance, the idea of distillation. Originally pursued as a way to purify substances and possibly create that elusive elixir of life, it ended up revolutionizing everything from medicine to the production of spirits. The next time you enjoy a glass of fine whiskey, remember you have a medieval alchemist to thank for the distillation process. Or how about the discovery of acids? In their quest for the philosopher's stone, these early scientists stumbled upon substances that would later revolutionize industries from textiles to explosives. But let's not gloss over the fact that many alchemists were as much about showmanship as they were about science. Some were more akin to medieval snake oil salesmen, peddling potions and powders with promises as empty as a charlatan's heart. But hey, every era has its hustlers. They spun tales of mystical transformations and celestial alignments, drawing in the gullible with the promise of wealth and health. And who could blame the dreamers? In a world where life was often nasty, brutish, and short, the allure of alchemy was hard to resist. It was a tantalizing thread of hope in an age of uncertainty. The romantic image of the alchemist, cloaked in robes, surrounded by smoke and mystery, is undeniably appealing. But let's not get carried away by the romance alone. The reality was often a mix of sweat, grime, and failure. Sulphurous fumes and mercury vapors weren't exactly conducive to a long life, and many alchemists found themselves prematurely on the wrong side of the grave, victims of their own hazardous work environments. It's easy to see them as tragic figures, sacrificing themselves on the altar of knowledge. Yet, for all their eccentricity, the alchemists of Toledo were part of a broader tapestry of medieval intellectual pursuit. The city's melting pot of cultures and ideas made it a fertile ground for their explorations. An alchemist in Toledo might have pored over a newly translated Arabic manuscript on mineralogy one day and debated Greek philosophy with a neighboring scholar the next. This cross-pollination of ideas was the real magic of the city, a magic that would eventually help light the way to the Renaissance. So, as you wander the labyrinthine streets of Toledo, imagine the alchemists at work, part scientist, part magician, part dreamer. They were chasing a vision not just of material wealth, but of understanding the very fabric of reality. They were the proto-scientists of their time, armed with nothing but their wits and their willingness to defy the limits of their world. And while the gold they sought slipped through their fingers, the legacy they left behind is richer than any treasure chest. In the end, the alchemists of Toledo remind us of the eternal human quest for knowledge and the lengths we'll go to chase our dreams, however improbable they may seem. They dared to imagine a world where the impossible was just a stone's throw away, and in doing so they paved the way for the dreamers and the seekers who would follow. But let's not get too philosophical just yet. There's still more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover as we continue our journey through this storied city. Stay tuned, because Toledo's tale is far from finished. While the alchemists of Toledo were busy dreaming of gold and immortality, they weren't doing so in a vacuum. The political and social fabric of 13th century Toledo was as intricate as the delicate filigree on a Moorish bracelet. This was a city where alliances were forged and shattered like glassware in an alchemist's workshop. If you wanted to play in the alchemical sandbox, you needed more than just a recipe for turning lead into gold. You needed connections, the right nods from the right people, and a keen sense of who might be breathing down your neck if you got too close to the sun. Enter Alfonso X, the king with a penchant for learning and a Rolodex that included some of the era's brightest minds. Known as Alfonso the Wise, though some might argue Alfonso the Ambitious would fit just as well. This was a monarch who understood that knowledge was a form of power. He wasn't just collecting scholars like some people collect porcelain cats. He was actively creating a cosmopolitan court where science, philosophy, and even a bit of mystical mumbo-jumbo could flourish. Under his reign, the patronage system in Toledo was like a medieval Kickstarter campaign, only instead of funding the next great card game, Alfonso was bankrolling the intellectual pursuits that might just change the world, or at least his treasury. Now, let's not get starry-eyed about Alfonso's scholarly pursuits. This was a time when the line between science and sorcery was thinner than a strand of silk from the east. The church, with its ever-watchful eye, loomed large over the proceedings, ready to pounce if things got too heretical. After all, this was still the Middle Ages, where questioning the divine order of things could earn you a front-row seat at a heresy trial. Alchemists had to navigate these treacherous waters with the skill of a court jester juggling flaming torches. They were constantly balancing the allure of discovery against the terrifying prospect of being labelled a heretic. Alfonso, ever the savvy ruler, knew the value of keeping the church in his good graces, but he also recognized the potential of harnessing the intellectual firepower available in Toledo. By supporting these knowledge seekers, he was placing a bet on the future, one that could pay off in new technologies, new medicines, or, dare he hope, new wealth. It was a strategic gamble, and one that required a deft hand to keep the various factions in check. The alchemists, in turn, had to ensure that their experiments, while ambitious, didn't cross the invisible line that separated acceptable inquiry from dangerous heresy. It was a tightrope walk, and one that was as exhilarating as it was perilous. Yet, for all the danger, there was a certain romance to it all. Picture alchemists by candlelight, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow as they pored over manuscripts filled with the wisdom of the ancients. They were driven by the thrill of discovery and the tantalizing possibility that they might unlock secrets that had eluded generations. But the reality was that their work was often tedious, fraught with setbacks and, let's face it, a bit smelly. The sulphurous fumes and the perpetual threat of explosions might not sound glamorous, but they were the necessary backdrop to their quest. The patronage system was the lifeline that kept this intellectual engine running. Alchemists depended on the financial support of their royal backers, and in return they offered not just their discoveries, but the prestige that came with being associated with cutting-edge research. It was a symbiotic relationship, but one that was built on a foundation as stable as Mercury. In a world where political fortunes could change as quickly as the weather, securing and maintaining a patron was both an art and a science. For the alchemists, the stakes were high. A successful experiment could lead to fame and fortune, while failure, or worse, suspicion of heresy, could spell disaster. The Church, with its considerable influence, was never far from the action. It was both a gatekeeper and a benefactor, offering its own form of patronage to those who could demonstrate that their work aligned with religious doctrine. The challenge for the alchemists was to convince both their secular and ecclesiastical patrons that their work was not only safe, but ultimately beneficial to the kingdom and the faith. In this delicate dance, the art of persuasion was as important as any alchemical formula. Alchemists had to be adept at not just mixing compounds, but also mixing with the right people. They needed to sell their visions of transformation and improvement, presenting their work as not just a scientific endeavor, but a divine calling. This was no easy task, given the Church's notorious skepticism of anything that smelled too much like magic. But the alchemists of Toledo were nothing if not resourceful, and they learned to navigate these treacherous waters with a blend of diplomacy and daring. As the sun set on Toledo, casting long shadows over its labyrinthine streets, the alchemists continued their work, ever mindful of the fine line they walked between innovation and heresy. They were the dreamers of their age, daring to ask questions that others feared to voice. And while they didn't always find the answers they sought, their efforts laid the groundwork for the scientific advancements that would follow. So, as we leave this chapter of Toledo's tale, remember that the alchemists were more than just the sum of their failures. They were pioneers in a world that often feared the very change they sought to bring. And with that, our journey through the vibrant, volatile city of Toledo continues. There's more to uncover, more myths to challenge, and more truths to share as we delve deeper into the social and political tapestry of this remarkable place. Stay with us, as the story is far from over. As the labyrinthine streets of Toledo weave their tales in the fading light, let's pivot from the personal struggles of alchemists to the broader tapestry of medieval society. Sure, the alchemists were the medieval equivalent of ambitious tech startups, minus the beanbags and stock options, but they also left a legacy that seeped into every corner of society. From the clinking coins of commerce to the hallowed halls of healing, alchemy was more than just a quixotic quest for gold, it was a catalyst for change. So, strap on your metaphorical safety goggles because we're diving into the alchemical ripple effect. First stop, medicine. Now, if you think medieval medicine was all leeches and humours, you're not entirely wrong, but give those medieval medics some credit. Thanks to alchemical practices, they started dabbling in distillation and the isolation of compounds. Think of it as the beta version of pharmaceuticals. Picture a medieval apothecary's shop, where herbs and minerals were transformed into potions promising everything from a good night's sleep to a swift recovery from the plague. Alchemy introduced the idea of experimentation to medicine, a radical notion at the time when most remedies were prescribed with a prayer and a pinch of hope. Take the work of Roger Bacon, a 13th century English Franciscan friar and alchemist who had his fingers in a lot of pies, scientifically speaking. He advocated for empirical methods in medicine, suggesting that experiments could yield insights as valuable as ancient texts. Radical, right? Bacon was like the Steve Jobs of his day, pushing boundaries and annoying the establishment. He wrote about the uses of what we might today recognize as chemical processes to create medicines, a notion that didn't catch on immediately, but planted the seeds for future scientific inquiry. And let's not forget metallurgy, alchemy's more grounded sibling. While the alchemists were busy trying to turn copper into cash, metallurgists were making practical advances that would, quite literally, build the world. The development of alloys and the refinement of metals like iron and steel were crucial for everything from weaponry to architecture. The alchemical processes of heating, cooling, and combining materials informed these techniques, inadvertently laying the foundation for industrial advances. In a way, alchemists were like the unsung roadies at the concert of progress, toiling behind the scenes to make sure society hit the high notes. But let's hit pause on the romanticism for a moment. The reality of alchemical practice was often less about the noble pursuit of knowledge and more about navigating the gritty economics of survival. Remember, this was a world where a pound of mercury could cost as much as a month's rent, and the line between innovation and insolvency was razor thin. Alchemists needed patrons, and patrons needed results. It was a transactional relationship, and not all experiments paid off. In fact, many ended in failure, an expensive, sometimes explosive failure. As for the primary sources of the day, they paint a picture of alchemy that oscillates between reverence and ridicule. Take the works of Thomas Aquinas, a heavyweight of medieval theology, who was cautiously optimistic about alchemy's potential to reveal divine truths. Then there's the ever-skeptical Dante Alighieri, who wasn't shy about relegating fraudulent alchemists to the eighth circle of hell in his Divine Comedy. These varied attitudes highlight a society grappling with the promise and peril of alchemical pursuits. Now, let's address the elephant in the laboratory, the philosopher's stone. This legendary substance was said to turn base metals into gold and grant immortality, a concept so tantalizing it could make even the most skeptical medieval scholar pause. But the stone was a myth, an alchemical white whale that eluded capture despite centuries of pursuit. While never found, the quest for the stone propelled the development of laboratory techniques that would eventually lead to real scientific breakthroughs. The romantic allure of the philosopher's stone may have been a mirage, but it was a mirage that led countless seekers down paths that would illuminate the dark corners of ignorance. In this sense, alchemy was as much about the journey as the destination. The alchemists' relentless tinkering, their willingness to fail spectacularly, was a critical step in the evolution from mysticism to scientific method. They were the original mad scientists, complete with bubbling beakers and dubious haircuts, their laboratories, the proving grounds for ideas that would eventually transcend their origins. And while it's easy to laugh at their more outlandish pursuits, like the search for the elixir of life in a beaker of boiling mercury, it's important to recognize the genuine contributions they made. Their work on the distillation of alcohol, for example, was a game-changer. Not only did it enhance the potency of medicinal concoctions, but it also laid the groundwork for the production of spirits. So, the next time you enjoy a glass of scotch, raise a toast to the alchemists who turned distillation into an art form. But let's not get too carried away with the spirit of celebration. The reality was that many alchemists toiled in obscurity, their achievements overshadowed by the shadowy reputation of their craft. Accusations of sorcery were never far away, and the ever-watchful eye of the Church could turn an innocent experiment into an inquisition. It was a high-stakes game, and the risk of being branded a heretic was as real as the threat of an alchemical explosion. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, alchemists were among the most resourceful and resilient figures of their time. They were social chameleons, adept at navigating the treacherous waters of patronage and politics. Their stories are reminders that the path to progress is rarely linear and often paved with the rubble of false starts and dead ends. As we continue our exploration of Toledo's rich history, remember that the alchemists were not just relics of a bygone era, they were pioneers, charting the unknown with little more than curiosity and courage. And while the gold they sought may have slipped through their fingers, the legacy of their quest endures, a testament to the transformative power of human imagination. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the social and political dynamics that shaped this remarkable city. There's plenty more to uncover, from the corridors of power to the bustling markets, as we continue to unravel the stories of those who dared to dream in the shadow of the impossible. As we venture deeper into Toledo's historical tapestry, let's pull the curtain back on the grand finale of our alchemical journey. The legacy of Toledo's alchemists isn't just a dusty footnote in a history book. It's a living testament to the power of cultural fusion and scientific curiosity. This city, once the buzzing brainchild of medieval intellectuals, continues to echo in our modern world like a particularly catchy tune you just can't shake off. First, let's tackle their scientific legacy. Sure, the alchemists didn't quite hit their jackpot with turning lead into gold, but they did pave the yellow brick road to chemistry. Their relentless tinkering laid the groundwork for the scientific method. Take distillation, for example. Alchemists weren't just brewing potions to rival the elixir of life, they were refining the processes that would eventually lead to the creation of antibiotics and anesthetics, lifesavers that get a lot more applause than a mythical stone. So, the next time you pop a painkiller, throw a mental high five to those medieval minds who dared to boil and bubble their way to breakthroughs. Now, let's talk about cultural fusion. Toledo was like a medieval DJ, mixing beats from different cultures into a harmonious track that resonated across continents. This city was a melting pot long before the term became a culinary metaphor. The convergence of Christian, Muslim and Jewish scholars created a vibrant exchange of ideas that made Toledo the intellectual Spotify playlist of its time. Through the translations of Arabic, Greek and Hebrew texts, Toledo became Europe's gateway to ancient wisdom, giving Europe the intellectual tools to eventually embark on the Renaissance. It's like the ultimate academic remix that went viral way before the internet. But let's not just laud the intellectual fireworks without acknowledging the darker shadows behind the scenes. Alchemy, despite its intellectual allure, was often overshadowed by the spectre of heresy. The church loomed large, ever ready to pounce on anything that smelled too much like sorcery. Alchemists had to be as savvy in politics as they were in science. It was a precarious balancing act, and many found themselves walking a tightrope between discovery and damnation. Yet, it was this very pressure cooker environment that forged innovation. Necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention, or in this case, the stern schoolmaster pushing you toward your next eureka moment. Speaking of eureka moments, let's not forget the enduring myths. The philosopher's stone, that elusive holy grail of alchemy. Its allure was undeniable, promising eternal life and infinite wealth. A medieval Powerball jackpot with a side of immortality. While no alchemist ever found it, the myth itself was a powerful motivator, driving centuries of scientific inquiry. It was the carrot on a stick, leading generations of thinkers down paths that would eventually illuminate the dark corners of ignorance. The stone may have been a mirage, but it was a mirage that inspired real and lasting progress. So, what about the economic realities? Alchemy wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was an economic endeavor. The costs of materials like mercury or sulfur were as steep as a Toledo hill, and alchemists needed patrons to fund their experiments. Wealthier patrons, like Alfonso X, invested in these intellectual pursuits not just out of curiosity, but as a calculated gamble on potential returns. They were the venture capitalists of their day, only instead of apps, they were banking on transmutations. And while many investments didn't pan out, the ones that did helped shape the economic landscape of Europe, influencing everything from mining techniques to the burgeoning field of pharmacology. The social dynamics of Toledo were equally fascinating. The city's unique blend of cultures wasn't just a harmonious coexistence. It was a dynamic, sometimes volatile cocktail of ideas and beliefs. Yet, this very tension was a catalyst for creativity. The friction between different worldviews forced scholars to think outside their cultural boxes, leading to innovations that a monocultural society might never have spawned. In Toledo, the clash of cultures was less a battle and more of a dance, a complex choreography that resulted in a legacy as rich and textured as any tapestry from the era. In reflecting on Toledo's alchemical scene, it's clear that the city was more than just a backdrop for medieval endeavors. It was an active player, a crucible where ideas were tested, reformed, and sometimes even exploded in a puff of sulphurous smoke. The alchemists, with their mix of science, mysticism, and sheer doggedness, remind us that the pursuit of knowledge is as much about the journey as the destination. They were dreamers and doers, walking the fine line between genius and folly, their legacy a testament to the transformative power of curiosity. So, as we close the book on our day in Toledo, let's not just remember the alchemists for their failures or their fantastical quests. Let's remember them for their courage to ask questions that others feared to voice, for their willingness to fail spectacularly in the pursuit of truth. They were the forerunners of modern science, the original mad scientists who dared to dream big in a world that often feared change. And in doing so, they set the stage for the intellectual renaissance that would sweep across Europe, transforming it into the cradle of modern scientific inquiry. In the end, the story of Toledo's alchemists is not just a tale of what was, but a blueprint for what could be. It's a reminder that innovation often requires a bit of madness, that progress is born from the collision of ideas, and that sometimes the most improbable dreams can lead to the most profound discoveries. As you drift off to sleep, let these thoughts linger like a familiar tune, a testament to the enduring power of human imagination. In the bustling ancient city of Syracuse, where the Mediterranean sun seemed to have a personal vendetta against shade, a curious young boy named Archimedes was busy scribbling not-so-random doodles in the sand. Born in 287 BCE, this math prodigy was already giving geometry a run for its money before most kids his age figured out which end of the stylus to hold. Now, if you're imagining a precocious child prodigy with a mop of unruly hair, you're probably not far off. But while his peers were busy trying not to trip over their togas, Archimedes was more interested in the eternal dance of numbers and the secrets they whispered to those who dared to listen. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic notion of a lone genius. Archimedes' early fascination with numbers wasn't just about the pure joy of mathematics. It was also about the practical world he lived in, a world where the political climate of Syracuse was as volatile as the Mediterranean weather. Syracuse was a powerhouse in its day, a city-state that could rival Athens or Corinth. It was strategically perched on the eastern coast of Sicily and was one of the richest Greek cities. This wasn't just because of its trade routes, but also due to its knack for producing brains like Archimedes. Now, you might be wondering what kind of political soap opera was playing out in Syracuse during Archimedes' time. Picture this, a city constantly at odds with its neighbors, always ready to flex some muscles when necessary. It was a place where power changed hands faster than you could say Pythagorean theorem. It's no wonder they needed someone like Archimedes to step in and solve their, well, let's call them logistical issues. Archimedes wasn't just your average number cruncher. He was the ancient world's equivalent of a Silicon Valley innovator, but with more chitin and less hoodie. His knack for solving problems with a touch of genius and a dash of quirkiness was legendary. Take the whole Eureka saga, for instance. The story goes that he discovered the principle of buoyancy while sloshing water in his bathtub. Cue the cartoon light bulb moment. He realized he could determine the purity of a gold crown by measuring the water it displaced. Legend has it, he was so excited, he ran through the streets of Syracuse in his birthday suit, shouting, "Eureka!" which, for those keeping score, is Greek for, "I've found it." Now, let's pause for a reality check. Did Archimedes actually streak through Syracuse like an ancient Greek flash mob? Well, it's a fun image, but it's more likely a bit of embellishment. While there's no solid evidence he performed a public striptease, the essence of the story captures his intense enthusiasm for discovery. Whether he was fully clothed or not, the idea of a scientist so engrossed in his work that he forgets everything else? That's pure Archimedes. Beyond the bathtub theatrics, Archimedes' contributions were as diverse as they were ingenious. He was the guy you called when you needed a clever solution to a pressing problem, and believe me, Syracuse had its fair share. Need a way to defend your city from Roman invaders? Call Archimedes. Sure, his defense mechanisms involved giant mirrors, supposedly setting ships on fire, a myth that's been debated more than your favorite conspiracy theory. But the guy knew how to think outside the amphora. And speaking of outside-the-box thinking, Archimedes didn't stop at mathematical theorems or war machines. He was just as comfortable dealing with the practicalities of everyday life. Take the Archimedes screw, for instance, a device still in use today, 2,300 years after its inception. It was designed to lift water from low-lying areas for irrigation and drainage. Practical? Yes. Ingenious? Absolutely. He was the ultimate problem solver, finding ways to make life a little easier for those in the trenches of ancient daily life. In a place like Syracuse, where the stakes were as high as the gods on Mount Olympus, Archimedes was the go-to guy. If there was a problem, he'd find a solution, often with a wink and a nod to the laws of physics. He wasn't just a mathematician or an inventor, he was a force of nature wrapped in a toga, using his brain to push the boundaries of what was possible. As we dig deeper into the life and times of Archimedes, it becomes clear that his legacy is more than just a series of equations and clever machines. It's a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Archimedes' story is a reminder that the world can always use a little more wonder and a lot more of those who dare to ask, what if? So, here we are, diving into the mechanical marvels of Archimedes, the ancient world's answer to a Swiss army knife, but infinitely more inventive. Let's break down the greatest hits of this Hellenistic virtuoso who turned mathematics into a one-man defense industry for Syracuse. If you thought math was just about balancing equations, Archimedes would like a word. First up, the Archimedean screw, which sounds like a dance move, but is, in fact, a water-lifting device. This contraption was a game-changer for agriculture, especially in a place where irrigation was as necessary as a toga in a Greek symposium. Picture a giant screw inside a hollow pipe that, when rotated, could lift water from low to high ground. This was crucial in the flatlands around the Nile, where they had more mud than crocs at a music festival. The screw could move water at a rate that made manual labor look like a snail's pace. It was a simple yet brilliant application of physics, and its legacy persists to this day. Farmers worldwide can thank Archimedes every time they irrigate their fields without breaking a sweat. But let's not get carried away with irrigation tech. There was a war at hand, and Archimedes wasn't about to let Syracuse become a Roman vacation spot. Enter the claw of Archimedes, a device so legendary it makes most modern myths look like bedtime stories. This was no ordinary claw. It was a gigantic grappling hook designed to lift enemy ships out of the water and send them crashing down like a toddler throwing a tantrum with building blocks. The mechanics were complex, involving a series of pulleys and levers that could hoist a ship up and then flip it over. Picture a medieval arcade game, but where the prize is a destroyed Roman galley. Now, about that whole giant mirror-setting ships on fire tale, let's pump the brakes. While the idea of Archimedes using solar death rays is tantalizing, it's more smoke than fire. Historical evidence is sketchier than a street artist's portfolio. The concept was tested centuries later, with results that were more meha than marvelous. It's plausible Archimedes dabbled in optics, but setting whole fleets ablaze? That's a stretch worthy of a yoga instructor. What Archimedes truly excelled at was psychological warfare. The claw, whether or not it was as effective as advertised, was a spectacle. Imagine being a Roman sailor, thinking you're about to have a leisurely conquest, only to witness your ship lifted like a bath toy. The sheer terror was enough to make even the bravest legionnaire consider a career change. Archimedes understood the power of perception. Sometimes the threat of a weapon is more potent than its actual use. And let's talk economics for a minute. Syracuse was no small fry. It was wealthy enough to bankroll these grand projects. The city-state's coffers were filled with revenues from trade and agriculture. Yet, maintaining a city's defences wasn't cheap. Resources were diverted from other sectors to fund these extraordinary inventions. Skilled labourers, materials, and time each came with a hefty price tag. The investment in Archimedes' devices illustrates a city on the brink, willing to gamble its wealth on one brilliant mind. In a way, Archimedes was the Steve Jobs of his era, minus the turtleneck and keynote speeches. He took existing concepts and elevated them to unprecedented levels. His understanding of levers and pulleys wasn't new, but his application was revolutionary. He saw the battlefield not just as a place of conflict, but as a playground of innovation. So, what did all this mean for Syracuse? Well, it kept the Romans at bay longer than anyone expected. Archimedes' genius turned every invader's nightmare into a reality. Yet, the cost was staggering, both financially and socially. The city's reliance on one man's intellect underscored its vulnerability. When Archimedes was eventually killed, legend has it by a Roman soldier who didn't recognize him, the city lost more than just a mathematician. It lost its strategic advantage and, ultimately, its independence. As we peel back the layers of Archimedes' legacy, it becomes clear that his inventions were more than just metal and mathematics. They were embodiments of a city's hopes, fears, and ambitions. His story is a reminder that innovation often walks hand in hand with risk, and that the line between genius and madness can be as thin as the edge of a Roman sword. As we continue to explore his life and times, one thing is certain: Archimedes might have been a man of numbers, but his impact was anything but quantifiable. So, as we stroll further down the sandy corridors of Archimedes' mind, let's pivot from his battlefield brilliance to the abstract world where he truly shone: mathematics. Now, if your idea of math is limited to balancing your checkbook, prepare for a revelation. Archimedes wasn't just crunching numbers to impress his peers at the Agora, he was laying the very foundation for what would one day become calculus. Yes, calculus. The same subject that has tormented generations of students. You can send your love letters or hate mail to Syracuse, care of Archimedes. Let's start with his fascination with pi, that oh-so-mystical ratio that every middle schooler knows as 3.14 something. While the rest of us are content with memorizing a few digits to impress at trivia night, Archimedes took it several steps further. Using a method that involved inscribing and circumscribing polygons, he calculated pi to be between 3.1408 and 3.14285. Not bad for a guy working without the benefit of modern computational tools. His approach involved increasing the number of polygon sides. a technique that later mathematicians would recognize as a precursor to the integral calculus developed by Newton and Leibniz. Speaking of future influences, Archimedes' work on P wasn't just a mathematical curiosity. It was a testament to his relentless pursuit of precision, a quality that set him apart from his contemporaries. After all, in an age where many still believed that the Earth rode on the back of a giant turtle, accuracy wasn't exactly the norm. Archimedes wasn't about to leave anything to cosmic chance, and his meticulous calculations were the academic equivalent of a mic drop. But let's not overlook his method of exhaustion, a technique for finding areas and volumes by approaching them as limits of an infinite series of shapes. If that sounds suspiciously like calculus, give yourself a gold star. Archimedes was doing this without the modern notation we rely on today. Instead, he used geometric reasoning to essentially exhaust the space under a curve, a method that would baffle mathematicians for centuries. It wasn't until the 17th century, with the advent of calculus, that his approaches would be fully appreciated. What drove him to such lengths? Was there a personal vendetta against the imperfections of the universe? Perhaps. But there's something undeniably poetic about a man obsessed with perfect circles in an imperfect world. Maybe Archimedes saw in these flawless shapes a reflection of the divine order, a way to impose logic on chaos. Or maybe he just liked circles. Who can say? But let's not pretend Archimedes was working in a vacuum. Ancient Greece was a hotbed of intellectual feuding, and Archimedes had his fair share of rivalries. Take the Alexandrian mathematician Conon of Samos, for example. Though the two were reportedly friends, they weren't above a bit of scholarly one-upmanship. Archimedes' letters to Conon were like the ancient version of a YouTube comment war, boasting about his latest discoveries while gently ribbing his friend for not keeping up. And let's not forget Eratosthenes, the guy who calculated the Earth's circumference and basically invented geography. While Archimedes was busy with his perfect circles, Eratosthenes was measuring shadows and distances to prove the Earth wasn't flat. The two shared a mutual respect, but let's be real. There was an air of competition. In a world where intellectual snobbery was practically a sport, these thinkers were the Olympic athletes of their time. Speaking of intellectual snobbery, the Greeks had it down to an art form. The likes of Plato and Aristotle were the ancient world's equivalent of rock stars, with loyal followers and enough ego to fill the Parthenon. Archimedes, though, wasn't much for the limelight. He preferred the solitude of his study to the bustling symposiums of Athens. While others debated philosophy over wine, he was meticulously crafting proofs and pondering theorems. Was he a bit of an intellectual snob himself? Perhaps. But when you're redefining the limits of human knowledge, a little arrogance is forgivable. Archimedes' legacy extended far beyond his own lifetime. His work laid the groundwork for centuries of mathematical exploration. From the Arab mathematicians of the Middle Ages to the European scholars of the Renaissance, his influence was undeniable. Even the likes of Galileo and Newton were standing on the shoulders of the Sicilian giant. Archimedes showed the world that mathematics wasn't just a tool for solving practical problems, it was a language, a way to describe the universe in all its complexity. Yet, for all his brilliance, Archimedes was a man of paradoxes. He was a mathematician who saw beauty in numbers, a scientist who found wonder in the mundane. He lived in an era that revered the mind, but was often at odds with its own limitations. His obsession with perfect circles might seem quaint today, but it speaks to a deeper truth. The human desire to find order amid chaos, to seek patterns in a universe that often seems random. As we continue our journey through Archimedes' life, it's clear that his contributions were more than just academic exercises. They were a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Archimedes might have been a man of numbers, but his impact was anything but quantifiable. And as we delve deeper into his world, one thing is certain, this tale is far from over. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises more ingenuity, more rivalry, and perhaps a few more mathematical surprises. Now, as we navigate the labyrinthine corridors of Archimedes' psyche, let's address the man behind the mathematical curtain. It's easy to get lost in his equations and inventions. But what about Archimedes, the human being? Was he really the absent-minded professor who forgot to dress before his morning jog? Or was there a shrewd strategist lurking beneath those tousled curls? First off, let's tackle the popular image of Archimedes as the archetypal mad scientist. Sure, the guy had his quirks, but who doesn't? Legend has it, Archimedes was so engrossed in his work that he often neglected basic human needs like food, sleep, and occasionally clothes. But was he truly the scatterbrained genius history paints him to be? Or is that just the kind of story that makes for good dinner party fodder? Take, for example, the tale of Archimedes drawing geometric shapes in the sand at the moment of his death. As the story goes, a Roman soldier allegedly interrupted his doodling, prompting Archimedes to demand, "Do not disturb my circles," before meeting his untimely end. It's a great line, but let's face it, anyone facing a Roman sword might have more pressing concerns than geometry. This anecdote smacks of the romantic embellishments that turn historical figures into legends. It's entirely possible Archimedes was indeed stubbornly focused on his work, but perhaps not quite as oblivious to his surroundings as this story suggests. Now, about his rumoured disdain for politics, Syracuse was a political hotbed with enough intrigue to rival a Shakespearean play. Archimedes, however, preferred the company of numbers to that of politicians. He wasn't one to get caught up in the political theatre that often accompanied the governance of city-states. While power-hungry leaders were busy plotting their next move on the geopolitical chessboard, Archimedes was content to play with levers and pulleys. His detachment from politics could have been a strategic move. Why get tangled in the mess of political alliances when you can focus on the pure logic of mathematics? Archimedes' relationships also offer a glimpse into his personality. He was reportedly close to his family, particularly his father, Phidias, who was an astronomer. This familial influence might explain Archimedes' early fascination with the heavens and the laws governing them. While there's little concrete evidence detailing Archimedes' social circles, it's clear he held intellectual companionship in high regard. His correspondence with other mathematicians, such as Eratosthenes and Conon, suggests a network of scholarly camaraderie, albeit with a hint of competitive banter. Speaking of competition, let's not forget the intellectual rivalries that marked his career. Archimedes was a big fish in the relatively small pond of Hellenistic science, which inevitably led to clashes of ego. Yet these rivalries weren't just about one-upmanship. They were catalysts for innovation, pushing Archimedes and his peers to explore new mathematical frontiers. It's a reminder that even the greatest minds are often driven by a mix of curiosity and a dash of vanity. Now, let's pivot to how Archimedes' personality influenced his work. Was his legendary focus a sign of genius, or a strategic choice to distance himself from the political chaos of Syracuse? There's a compelling argument that his single-minded dedication was both a shield and a sword. By immersing himself in intellectual pursuits, Archimedes could navigate the volatile political landscape while contributing to his city's defense in ways that transcended mere politics. Consider his inventions, the Archimedean screw, the claw of Archimedes, even the legendary, if dubious, death ray. These weren't just feats of engineering, they were acts of strategic genius. Each device not only addressed a practical need, but also showcased Archimedes' knack for psychological warfare. By creating machines that confounded and terrified enemies, he wielded his intellect like a weapon, protecting Syracuse without dirtying his hands in the political fray. But, rather than a simple tale of brains over brawn, Archimedes' story is a testament to the power of intellect in a world that often valued strength above all else. His ability to remain above the political squabbles while still affecting the outcomes speaks volumes about his strategic acumen. He wasn't just a passive observer of history, he was actively shaping it, one theorem at a time. As we peel back the layers of Archimedes' legacy, it becomes clear that his quirks and relationships were more than just footnotes in his biography. They were integral to the man he was and the impact he left behind. Was he an absent-minded professor, a cunning strategist, or a bit of both? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, in the grey areas that history so often overlooks. In exploring the personal side of Archimedes, we find a man driven by an insatiable curiosity, a desire to understand and, in some ways, control the world around him. His disdain for politics wasn't a failure to engage with his times, but rather a conscious choice to focus on what he believed truly mattered, the pursuit of knowledge and the quest for truth. As we continue our journey through the annals of Archimedes' life, keep in mind that the line between legend and reality is often as blurred as one of his sand-drawn circles. But that's what makes history so captivating. The blend of fact and myth, the human stories that transcend time, and the enduring quest to understand the minds that shaped the world. The story of Archimedes is far from over, and as we dive deeper, we'll uncover even more of the brilliance and mystery that makes him one of history's most fascinating figures. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As we continue our journey through Archimedes' life, let's wade into the murky waters of his final days and the siege of Syracuse. Picture a city under siege, its hopes pinned on the brilliance of one man. The year is 212 BCE, and the Romans are knocking on Syracuse's door with the persistence of a telemarketer during dinner. Led by the relentless general Marcus Claudius Marcellus, the Roman forces had their sights set on this Sicilian jewel. Despite the best efforts of Archimedes and his mechanical marvels, the Roman war machine was proving harder to deter than a determined cat burglar. And so, the story goes that Archimedes met his end in the chaos of the Roman invasion. The legend paints a vivid picture as Roman soldiers stormed the city. Archimedes was so engrossed in a geometric problem that he failed to notice the pandemonium. A soldier, allegedly unfamiliar with the frazzled genius, demanded his surrender. Archimedes, ever the philosopher, reportedly protested, "Do not disturb my circles," before meeting a grisly fate. Now, this tale has all the hallmarks of a dramatic legend, brilliant yet oblivious genius, the cruelty of war, and, of course, a memorable last line. It's the kind of story that sticks like gum to a sandal. But let's hit pause on the drama. The reality of Archimedes' death might have been less poetic and more brutal. In the throes of war, there's little room for eloquence. While it's tempting to envision Archimedes heroically defending his diagrams to the death, the truth is likely more mundane. He was an old man, possibly in his 70s, caught in the crossfire of a military conquest. The Romans, known for their efficiency rather than their sentimentality, probably saw him as just another obstacle in a city ripe for the taking. It's a stark reminder that even the greatest minds can be silenced by the brute force of history. Yet, Archimedes' legacy didn't die with him. If anything, it grew, echoing through the corridors of time like a particularly persistent earworm. His inventions and mathematical insights laid the groundwork for centuries of scientific exploration. Picture his work as the original DIY manual for modern science. Need to understand levers? Archimedes has you covered. Curious about buoyancy? His bathtub antics turned into foundational principles. Calculating pi. He paved the way for future number crunchers, making sure your irrational numbers stayed eternally irrational. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and Archimedes was the name on every scholar's lips. His works were rediscovered, translated, and revered. In the 16th century, Galileo Galilei, the man who dared to look up and see more than just stars, credited Archimedes as his mathematical muse. And then, of course, there's Sir Isaac Newton, who famously stood on the shoulders of giants, Archimedes being one of them. His principles of levers and mechanics became the bedrock for Newtonian physics, and it's no exaggeration to say that without Archimedes, we might not have had our apple-dropping moment of gravity clarity. So why does Archimedes' story endure? Why, after more than 2 millennia, do we still find ourselves drawn to this toga-clad tinkerer? Perhaps it's the duality of his existence, the blend of myth and reality, the balance of art and science. In a world that often seems random and chaotic, Archimedes offers a glimpse of order, a promise that logic and creativity can coexist. His life is a testament to the power of curiosity, a reminder that sometimes the most profound truths are discovered not in grandiose declarations, but in quiet moments of introspection. In the end, Archimedes was more than just a mathematician or an inventor. He was a visionary who dared to ask questions that others hadn't even thought to ponder. His legacy is not only in the equations and theorems that bear his name, but in the spirit of inquiry he inspired. He showed us that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble endeavor, one that transcends the limitations of time and space. As we wrap up this exploration of Archimedes' life, it's clear that his story is far from over. It continues to unfold, a tapestry of innovation, resilience, and ingenuity. In an age where technology changes faster than you can say algorithm, Archimedes' tale is a comforting reminder that some principles are timeless. So next time you marvel at the elegance of a lever or the precision of a calculation, remember that you're standing on the shoulders of a giant, a man who, in his quest for understanding, changed the world. And perhaps, in our own way, we can continue his legacy, daring to ask the impossible questions and, like Archimedes, finding joy in the pursuit of answers. Your eyelids peel open as the first slivers of sunlight slice through the cracks in the mud-brick walls of your modest dwelling. Welcome to Nineveh, the jewel of the Assyrian Empire, where ambition is as abundant as the dust swirling in the streets. It's the 7th century BC, and you, my friend, are a soldier in the army of one of the most formidable empires the ancient world has ever seen. You're not just any soldier, though. You're part of the mighty military machine that keeps the sprawling empire from crumbling like a clay tablet left out in the rain. As you step out into the bustling streets, let's talk about the city you call home. Nineveh is a veritable hive of activity, and its infrastructure would make even the most seasoned urban planner raise an eyebrow. The city's famous aqueducts, for instance, are nothing short of engineering marvels. Stretching over 50 kilometers, these channels bring fresh water from the hills directly into the city, quenching the thirst of thousands and keeping those lush hanging gardens from wilting under the relentless sun. It's a good thing, too, because nobody wants a dehydrated populace or droopy plants. The streets are a cacophony of merchants haggling, donkeys braying, and the occasional scribe shouting out the latest royal edict. You can smell the freshly baked bread mingling with the less pleasant aromas of the tanneries, all part of the sensory overload that is daily life in Nineveh. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. The city's grandeur is built on the backs of the conquered, and your role as a soldier is to keep it that way. In the Assyrian military, you're part of an elite force that's less about chivalric codes and more about getting the job done. Forget shiny armor and noble quests. Your gear is practical, designed to withstand the rigors of relentless campaigns. You've got your bronze helmet, an iron sword, and a shield that's seen better days. It's not glamorous, but it's effective and expensive. War isn't cheap, after all. The cost to outfit a single soldier like you could be the equivalent of several months' wages for a common laborer. And when you multiply that by an army that can number in the tens of thousands, you start to see why the empire needs to keep expanding. But let's take a step back and think about why your role is so crucial. The Assyrian Empire is a bit like an ancient version of a multinational corporation with a serious thirst for growth. Conquest isn't just about glory, it's about resources, grain, tribute, manpower. Each new territory adds a little more to the empire's coffers, which in turn funds more conquests. It's a vicious cycle, just like those repetitive pop songs you can't get out of your head. And you, dear soldier, are both a cog in this machine and one of its chief beneficiaries. As you weave through the crowd, you pass by some of the city's economic powerhouses. There's the marketplace, where traders exchange everything from textiles to exotic spices. The economy here is a well-oiled machine, with every coin and commodity playing its part. But let's not sugarcoat it. It's also a system that thrives on inequality. The spoils of war line the pockets of the elite, while the common folk, like those merchants you see, hustle just to get by. It's a reminder that for every grand palace and lush garden, there's a story of someone who paid the price for it. Turning a corner, you catch a glimpse of the grand palace where Ashurbanipal, the current king, holds court. He's a ruler with a penchant for both war and wisdom, known for his vast library and relentless military campaigns. But let's not pretend he's some kind of ancient philosopher king. His reign is as much about power as it is about patronage. He knows that keeping his generals happy and his borders secure requires both a steady hand and a hefty treasury. Now, about those spoils of war. They're not just glittering treasures hoarded by the elite. They're the very lifeblood of the city's economy. Conquered lands pay tribute in silver and goods, feeding the insatiable appetite of Nineveh. It's a system that's as old as time itself. Take, control, and keep the wheels of empire turning. But this isn't just about economics. It's about survival. Each conquest brings stability to the core, ensuring that Nineveh remains not just a city, but a symbol of imperial power. As the sun climbs higher, casting a golden hue over the city's ziggurats, you head toward the military barracks. These are your stomping grounds, where you train and prepare for whatever the Empire demands of you next. It's a place where camaraderie meets strategy, and where every soldier knows that today's drills could very well become tomorrow's battle tactics. You see, in Assyria, the military isn't just a career, it's a calling, a way of life. It's an institution that demands loyalty and rewards it with camaraderie and, if you're lucky, a share in the spoils. But let's not kid ourselves, it's also a brutal business. For every victory parade, there's a battlefield littered with the fallen. The costs of warfare are staggering, both in human lives and in resources. But as you stand among your fellow soldiers, you know that each one of you is part of something greater. So, as you prepare for the day ahead, remember that you're not just defending a city, but an idea. The idea that Assyria is, and will remain, the heart of the ancient world. Through the dust and noise of Nineveh, you hear the distant echoes of empires past and future, each one built on the ambitions and sacrifices of those who came before. And as the sun continues its climb, you take your place among them, ready to face whatever the day and history has in store. As you stand among your fellow soldiers, ready to face the day, the morning sun paints the barracks in shades of determination and discipline. Today is drill day, where the precision of your formation matches the sharpness of your blade, a ritual as time-honored as the empire itself. The Assyrian military isn't just an army, it's a finely tuned instrument of power, and you're expected to play your part with the fidelity of a lyre string. Now, let's dispel those romanticized myths of invincible warriors charging into battle with an heroic gleam in their eyes. Sure, the Assyrians were legendary for their military prowess, but it wasn't just brute strength that made them formidable. It was innovation. Take the chariot, for instance, a terrifying two-wheeled platform of destruction, slicing through enemy ranks with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just the chariot itself that was revolutionary, it was the psychological warfare it represented. The sight and sound of those wheels thundering across the battlefield was enough to send many foes packing before the first arrow even flew. And speaking of arrows, let's talk about the logistics of keeping an army fed, armed, and ready to conquer. If you think supplying a modern army is a headache, imagine coordinating provisions for tens of thousands of soldiers across vast stretches of hostile territory. We're talking about a supply chain that would make even today's logistics experts break into a cold sweat. Grain, meat, and beer were the holy trinity of the Assyrian soldier's diet. Not exactly gourmet, but it kept you marching. And if you were lucky, maybe there'd be a little honey or dried fruit to sweeten the deal. But let's be real, on a long campaign, even hardtack could start to taste like ambrosia. The daily grind of military life is as much about maintaining morale as it is about sharpening swords. Discipline isn't just a virtue, it's a survival mechanism. Whether it's drilling in formation or ensuring your gear is battle-ready, every detail is a cog in the larger machine of empire. Even the most mundane tasks take on a new urgency when the stakes are life and death. And if you think about it, there's a certain camaraderie that comes from this shared rigor, an understanding that your fellow soldier has your back just as you have theirs. But let's not gloss over the grim realities of life on campaign. War is a dangerous business, and no amount of preparation can fully insulate you from its hazards. Disease, exhaustion, and the ever-present threat of enemy ambushes loom like storm clouds on the horizon. The glory of conquest is tempered by the sobering knowledge that not everyone will make it back to Nineveh. Yet despite these perils, the promise of spoils and glory keeps you marching forward. It's a delicate balance between risk and reward, a calculation that every soldier must make. Now, about those famous Assyrian tactics that have earned you such a fearsome reputation. Siege warfare is where the Assyrians truly shine, turning the art of encirclement into a science. With battering rams, siege towers, and a relentless barrage of projectiles, you've honed the ability to breach even the most stubborn city walls. Yet, it's not just about brute force, it's about strategy. The Assyrian army is a master of deception, using feints and false retreats to lure enemies into traps. It's like a deadly game of chess, where the stakes are measured in lives and cities. As you go through the motions of the morning drill, you're reminded of the sheer scale of the Assyrian military apparatus. Imagine coordinating an army that could number over 100,000. An incredible feat in an age without the conveniences of modern communication. Orders are relayed by messengers on horseback, and every decision must be executed with precision. It's a delicate balance of authority and autonomy, where even a single misstep can spell disaster. And let's not forget the economic engine that keeps this military juggernaut rolling. War is as much about economics as it is about territory. Each conquest brings in new wealth, which in turn funds further campaigns. It's a self-sustaining cycle, but one that requires constant vigilance. The spoils of war aren't just treasures to be hoarded. They're the lifeblood of the empire, fueling its insatiable hunger for expansion. You see, the Assyrian Empire is a bit like a shark. It has to keep moving to survive. And you, dear soldier, are the teeth that keep it fed. Yet, for all its grandeur, the empire is built on a foundation of human toil and sacrifice. Every triumph comes at a cost, a sobering reminder that history is written in both glory and blood. As you finish your morning drill, you can't help but wonder about the stories that will be told of your era and the legacy that you will leave behind. But for now, the day beckons, and with it, the challenges and triumphs that await on the horizon. As you dust off the training sweat and make your way through the bustling streets of Nineveh, the city feels like it's holding its breath before a grand spectacle. And rightly so. You're heading to the local temple, the hub where the divine whispers of the gods mingle with the very human ambitions of rulers and generals. This isn't just any temple, though. It's one of those architectural masterpieces that could make even the most jaded traveller stop and marvel. Think ziggurats that kiss the sky, their steps a literal stairway to heaven, or at least that's what the priests would have you believe. Now, let's talk about this three-way tango between politics, religion, and military might. You see, Assyria isn't just flexing its muscles on the battlefield, it's also got a spiritual game plan that could make a modern PR firm green with envy. The Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, isn't just your typical monarch sitting on a pile of gold. He's portrayed as a warrior king with a direct line to the gods, a celestial endorsement that's as much political theatre as it is divine decree. It's like if your local mayor claimed to have the Pope and a couple of archangels on speed dial. But why the divine showmanship, you ask? Simple morale and legitimacy. In a world where life is as unpredictable as the Euphrates in flood season, people crave certainty. And nothing says, "I've got this," like a ruler who can claim both earthly power and divine favour. The Assyrians took this to heart, believing that victories on the battlefield were directly tied to the gods' goodwill. If the gods smiled upon you, you conquered. If they frowned, well, let's just say you'd better have a good plan B. As you join the throng at the temple, it's hard to ignore the propaganda machine at work. Murals depict the king not just as a warrior, but as a quasi-divine figure, leading armies with the backing of the gods. It's a visual symphony of power, a reminder that the king's authority is both unquestionable and unassailable. And in case you were wondering, yes, this kind of imagery worked wonders for public protection. It's all about keeping the empire's subjects both in awe and in line. However, let's not get carried away by the grandeur. While the idea of a divine right king sounds like a fairy tale, the harsh reality is that it's also a tool of control. It's a not-so-subtle reminder that questioning the king is akin to questioning the gods themselves, a risky business in any era. And that's where fear and reverence blend into a potent cocktail that keeps the empire together. It's a social contract of sorts. Pledge your loyalty, and the king will ensure the gods keep the chaos at bay. But what about those gods? They're not exactly the benevolent, cloud-sitting tights we often imagine. The Assyrian pantheon is a motley crew of deities, each with their own quirks and domains. There's Ashur, the head honcho, a god of war and national identity, whose favour is as critical to the empire as a well-placed fortress. Then there's Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, because, frankly, why should those two ever be separate? As the midday sun casts long shadows over the temple courtyard, the priests begin their ritual chants. It's a spectacle of incense and invocations, a theatrical display designed to curry favour with the gods and, by extension, keep the empire's wheels turning. The priests themselves are no mere holy men. They're key players in this game of cosmic chess, wielding influence that extends from the altar to the king's council chamber. Now, let's take a moment to debunk a few myths. It's easy to romanticize this divine drama as a seamless blend of faith and politics, but the reality is a bit more, shall we say, opportunistic. The king's relationship with the gods is less about spirituality and more about maintaining power. It's a shrewd strategy, one that uses divine endorsement as a lever to cement his rule. In other words, it's less about celestial harmony and more about earthly control. To the average Ninevite, this divine political synergy is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it offers a sense of stability in an unpredictable world. On the other, it's a reminder of the king's absolute power, a power that extends from the battlefield to the very heavens. It's a delicate balance, one that relies on the king's ability to keep both his subjects and his gods appeased. As you leave the temple, the weight of this divine politics military triad lingers in the air, much like the incense smoke that swirls around you. It's a reminder that in Assyria, power is as much about perception as it is about might. Whether it's in the form of a chariot charge or a priest's blessing, the empire thrives on its ability to blend fear with reverence, a concoction that has kept it at the pinnacle of ancient power. But let's not end on too sombre a note. As you make your way back through the bustling streets, the vibrancy of Nineveh is a testament to the empire's enduring strength. It's a place where ambition thrives, where the echoes of past conquests mingle with the promise of future glories. And for you, dear soldier, this is the world you're a part of. A world where every day is a new chapter in the grand narrative of Assyria. As you head back to the barracks, the sun dips toward the horizon, casting the city in a warm, golden glow. Tomorrow brings another day, another drill, and perhaps another battle. But for now, you're content to be a part of this living tapestry, a story woven with the threads of history, myth, and the relentless march of time. And as night falls over Nineveh, you prepare to rest, ready to face whatever the dawn and the gods have in store. As shadows lengthen over Nineveh and you stroll back to the barracks, it's time to dive into the nitty-gritty of military life, the stuff that doesn't make it onto those majestic murals. You see, in the Assyrian army, the social dynamics are as layered as a ziggurat. At the top of this military pyramid, you've got the elite chariotry. Think of them as the rock stars of the battlefield, rolling in with their flashy two-wheeled rides. But don't let the glamour fool you. Those chariots are as much a psychological weapon as a physical one, designed to instill fear and chaos among the enemy ranks. Now, the charioteers, they're the creme de la creme, often plucked from the ranks of nobility or the well-connected. These guys can trace their lineage back to the who's who of Assyrian society. But don't be too quick to envy their status. Sure, they might get the best seats in the house, but it's a high-risk, high-reward gig. A chariot charge could turn you into a legend or a cautionary tale faster than you can say, "wheel rut." Beneath the chariotry lies the cavalry, the nimble cavalrymen who form the Empire's rapid response team. If the chariots are the tanks, these riders are the cavalry scouts and shock troops. They're not just about speed, they're the Empire's eyes and ears, often sent ahead to gauge enemy strength and movements. A wrong move here, and you could find yourself outnumbered faster than you can saddle up. And then there's the infantry, the backbone of the Assyrian military machine. These are the guys who do the heavy lifting, quite literally. Armed with spears and shields, they're the unsung heroes who hold the line while the chariots and cavalry dance their deadly dance. But don't think for a second that they're just fodder for the front lines. The infantry is a well-oiled unit, skilled in formations and tactics that have been honed over countless campaigns. They're the ones who'll be marching home with the spoils of war, or not marching home at all. It's a stark reminder that in this era, life is cheap and glory is expensive. Speaking of expense, let's talk about the real game changer. Iron weaponry. If bronze was the old smartphone, iron is the latest flagship model. It's tougher, more durable, and it's revolutionizing the battlefield. The switch from bronze to iron isn't just a technological shift, it's an economic one. Iron is more abundant, which means more weapons for more soldiers. An equation that tips the scales in favor of the Assyrians. But here's the kicker. Iron might be more common, but crafting it into a battle-ready weapon still takes skill and resources. It's a reminder that even advancements come with trade-offs. Yet, for all this talk of hierarchy and hardware, let's not forget the human element. Camaraderie is the glue that binds these disparate units into a single, formidable force. In the barracks, rank might separate you, but shared hardship brings you together. It's the late-night watch shifts, the shared meals of bread and beer, and the collective grumbling about the next campaign that forge bonds as strong as the iron swords you wield. These are the moments that turn soldiers into brothers and rivals into allies. But competition isn't absent, it's just beneath the surface. Promotions in the Assyrian army aren't handed out like free samples at the market. They're earned through feats of bravery, cunning, or sometimes just being in the right place at the right time. And while loyalty to the empire is a given, personal ambitions simmer beneath the surface. Every soldier dreams of catching the eye of a superior, of making a name that echoes through the halls of Nineveh long after they're gone. Yet, balancing these ambitions with the expectations of the empire is a delicate dance. Step out of line, and you risk everything. In an army where discipline is paramount, even the slightest insubordination can lead to severe consequences. It's a constant reminder that while the rewards are great, the risks are even greater. But that's the allure of military life, isn't it? The promise of glory, tempered by the ever-present shadow of mortality. As you settle in for the evening, surrounded by your comrades, you can't help but reflect on the path that brought you here. It's a path paved with ambition, sacrifice, and the unyielding march of history. And as the stars emerge, casting their ancient light over the city, you know that tomorrow brings with it new challenges, new opportunities, and the eternal promise of the Assyrian Empire. So, as the night deepens and the sounds of the barracks fade into the quiet of the desert, you prepare to rest. Because in this world of shifting sands and uncertain futures, one truth remains constant: the empire endures, and so too does the spirit of those who serve it. For in the end, it's not just about the conquests or the spoils. It's about being part of a legacy that stretches across time, a legacy forged in iron and ambition. And as you close your eyes, ready for whatever dawn may bring, you know that you, too, are a part of this grand tapestry, woven with the threads of history and the dreams of those who came before. As you let sleep take over, the distant sounds of revelry begin to seep through the barracks walls, a reminder that tonight is no ordinary night. It's feast time, my friend, and in true Assyrian fashion, it's an affair that promises to be as lavish as it is legendary. After a day spent sweating it out in the sun and strategizing your next move on the military chessboard, nothing says "job well done" like a bellyful of roasted lamb and a goblet of wine. So, you rise from your cot, ready to partake in a celebration that would make Bacchus himself RSVP, yes. But before you get swept away by the allure of overflowing amphoras and succulent cuts of meat, let's set the record straight about these infamous Assyrian feasts. They're not just about indulgence, they're a political and social statement. Picture this: a long table lined with soldiers, scribes, and the occasional noble, a mix as diverse as the empire itself. The food is more than sustenance. It's a symbol of the empire's vast reach, a menu sourced from the far-flung corners of conquered lands. Each dish whispers tales of territories subdued and resources claimed, a culinary map of Assyrian dominion. Now, about that lamb. It's not just any lamb, it's a sacrificial offering, cooked to perfection and seasoned with the spices of the empire's latest conquests. In a way, each bite is a taste of victory, a reminder of the blood, sweat, and iron that keep the empire's heart beating. Of course, there's also the ubiquitous barley beer, the liquid courage that lubricates both conversation and camaraderie. And let's not forget the wine, a luxury imported from the vineyards of the conquered, its rich flavors a testament to the empire's unyielding appetite for expansion. As you dig in, surrounded by the chatter of your fellow soldiers, it's hard not to reflect on the day's adventures. The drills, the discipline, the constant push to be better, faster, stronger. It's all part of the grand tapestry of Assyrian life, a life that's both exhilarating and exhausting. But tonight, those worries can wait. Tonight is about celebration, about savoring the fruits of your labor, literally. Yet, amidst the laughter and libations, let's not romanticize the empire's invincibility. Sure, the Assyrians were the ancient world's military juggernaut, but that doesn't mean they were without cracks. The empire was a beast of burden, carrying the weight of constant conquest and the ever-present threat of rebellion. Internally, the administrative machinery needed to manage such vast territories was as complex as it was fragile. The costs of maintaining this iron grip were astronomical, requiring a constant influx of resources and manpower. And externally? Well, let's just say the neighbours weren't exactly sending over fruit baskets. You see, keeping an empire this size in check is a bit like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Impressive, sure, but one false move and everything goes up in smoke. The constant demand for expansion wasn't just about greed, it was a matter of survival. Each conquered territory not only filled the empire's coffers, but also acted as a buffer against encroaching enemies. It's a precarious balance, one that required both military might and diplomatic finesse. A lesson in the art of empire building that resonates even today. As the night wears on, the conversation inevitably turns to legacy. What will history say about the Assyrian Empire, about the men who bled and fought to keep its borders secure? It's a question that's as old as civilization itself, one that every soldier, every ruler has pondered under the stars. The Assyrian military machine was a force of nature, but it was also a product of its time, a reflection of the age's ambitions and anxieties. It's a stark reminder that even the mightiest empires are but temporary tenants in the annals of history, their stories written in the sands of time. So, as you sip your wine and listen to the tales of battles won and lost, remember that the true legacy of the Assyrians isn't just in their conquests, but in the lessons they left behind. Lessons about the fleeting nature of power, the importance of adaptability, and the unyielding march of progress. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of the invincible warrior, but the reality is far more complex and far more human. As the feast winds down and the first hints of dawn appear on the horizon, you make your way back to the barracks. The city is quiet now, a stark contrast to the earlier revelry. It's a moment of reflection, a time to ponder what it means to be a part of something greater than yourself. The Assyrian Empire may be an ancient memory, yet its echoes still resonate in the corridors of modern power, a testament to the enduring impact of one of history's most formidable fighting forces. In the end, the story of the Assyrians is not just about battles and borders, it's about the relentless pursuit of legacy, the desire to leave a mark on the world. And as you close your eyes, ready to greet a new day, you understand that your place in this grand narrative is both a privilege and a responsibility. For in the end, the true measure of an empire isn't in the territories it conquers, but in the stories it inspires. And that, dear friend, is a legacy worth fighting for.